Very good. I have 6:32. I will start by reading our compliance notice. In compliance with the state and county shelter-at-home orders, and as allowed by the governor's executive order N-29-20, which allows for a deviation of teleconference rules required by the Ralph M. Brown Act, City Council meetings will be held by teleconference only until further notice. Rather than attending in person, the resident should call 805-865-7276 to provide public comment via telephone. And I would add tonight that we expect much public comment. Our queue limit is 30. So if you call in and can't get placed, you need to call back so we make sure we get your public comment. The phone line will be open just prior to the start of the closed session meeting, which was earlier this evening, and again prior to the start of the regular meeting. When public comments can be submitted via email, send them to cityclerk@prcity.com prior to 12 noon on the day of the council meeting to be posted as an addendum to the agenda. If submitting written comments in advance of the meeting, please note the agenda item by number or name. City council meetings will be live streamed during the meeting and also available to play later on YouTube by accessing the following link, www.prcity.com/YouTube. Once again, the public comment number to call this evening is 805-865-7276. With that, I will call our meeting to order, the regular meeting for the Paso Robles City Council for Tuesday, September the 15th. And I would advise all to mute their microphones, with the exception of Councilwoman Garcia, and ask her to please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. One moment, please. I'm adjusting my tech here. Next up, we have our invocation. Do we have our invocator present tonight?
Yes, you do. This is Barbara Miller.
Welcome.
Thank you. So let us pray. Holy and loving God, we give you thanks for being with our world as we continue to live through the COVID-19 pandemic. And we give you thanks for being with the western part of the United States as people live with the devastation and smoke of hundreds of fires. This evening, we give you thanks for the Paso Robles City Council and the city staff for their diligent efforts in keeping our city functioning in the best way possible to protect all who live and work here. I thank you, God, for all the time and energy that they give to our city. We thank you for their patience and perseverance in taking care of city problems as they provide for the health and mental well-being of the people of Paso Robles. God, we pray for tonight's agenda and give thanks for your presence with the council as they review and consider each item. We offer these prayers in your holy name. Amen.
Thank you. May we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Garcia?
Here.
Councilmember Gregory?
Here.
Councilmember Hammond?
Here.
Councilmember Strong?
Here.
And Mayor Martin?
And I am present. And you'll have to forgive me, I'm still struggling to see my agenda. Okay, we set this time apart at every council meeting so we can introduce staff members and others present who are involved in doing the business of the city. I will turn it over to staff to make the rounds and tell us who's attending tonight.
Warren Frace, Community Development Director. With me tonight is the City Engineer, David Athey.
Christopher Leckel, Interim Public Works Director. And with me tonight is Ditas Esperanza, Capital Projects Engineer, and Matt Thompson, Wastewater Manager.
Julie Dolan, Community Services Director, and I'm joined by Cindy Patty, Recreation Staff Assistant, Angelica Fortin, City Librarian, Linda Plesha, Recreation Services Manager, and Frida Berman, Maintenance Superintendent.
Ty Lewis, Police Chief.
Jonathan Stornetta, Fire Chief. With me is Battalion Chief Scott Hallett.
Ryan Cornell, Administrative Services.
Sarah Johnson Rios, Assistant City Manager. And with me from the City Manager's Office is Dave McHugh, IT Manager. Melissa Martin, Acting City Clerk. Shauna Howenstein, Civic Engagement Coordinator. And I'd also like to welcome Paul Sloan, the city's relatively new Economic Development Manager, who you'll be hearing from in one of the items tonight.
Kimberly Hood, Interim City Attorney.
Tom Frucci, City Manager.
Very good. Thank you all. Prior to the open session tonight, we had a published closed session meeting of the Paso Robles City Council. I'll ask the City Attorney if there is any reportable action from that.
Thank you, Mayor. The Council convened in closed session for 2 items on the regular agenda: conference with real property negotiators regarding 4301 Second Wind Way, and a conference with labor negotiators for the unrepresented and represented groups identified on the agenda. The Council provided direction to both real property and labor negotiators. There was no reportable action. The Council also had a special closed session agenda notice for public employee performance evaluation, City Manager. That is being continued to the October 6th meeting.
Very good. Thank you. We start off tonight's agenda with item number 1, presentations. This is a report only, does not require any council action. This is our COVID-19 community update. Mr. Stornetta.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Martin, members of the council. Jonathan Stornetta, Fire Chief. Next page, please. The state now has a total of over 757,000 positive cases, which is an increase of approximately 58,000 new cases since our last report to the council. Total deaths in the state have risen to 14,385, an increase of over 1,480 deaths since our last report. Overall, we are starting to see a decrease in the number of new cases and death rates throughout the state since our last council report 2 weeks ago. Next slide, please. The statewide positivity rate has decreased from 5.2% to 3.5% today. This is the lowest rate since the state began reporting the data in late March. The Paso Robles region remains at the top for most cases in the county. San Luis Obispo County total cases are at 3,293. That's an increase of 15 since yesterday. Of those, 201 of those cases remain active. Over the weekend, the county had 3 more deaths, and that brings the total deaths in the county to 26. Next page, please. San Luis Obispo County remains in the purple tier, which is widespread. As of today, the state reported that we have finally gone below the maximum threshold of the purple tier. For the first time, our daily cases are averaging 6.3 new cases per 100,000 population. For the next 2 weeks, we must remain below 20 new cases per day before we are eligible to move to the red tier. If we continue at this rate, we could possibly move into the red tier on September 29th. It should be noted, though, if at any point we go above 20 cases per day, the clock essentially resets until we go below that limit, and then we start another 2 weeks. Once we move into the red tier, restaurants will be able to provide indoor dining with 25% capacity. Next slide, please. The metrics I presented tonight show that we are starting to make progress. I'm cautiously optimistic in this progress and urge residents to stay vigilant and to keep taking the precautions that are working. Those include wearing face coverings in public, observing social distancing when outside, and staying home whenever possible. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. This is a presentation. No council action is required. Are there any council questions? Mr. Gregory.
Yeah, Jonathan, on the daily average, is it just exceeding that number one day, or are they not averaging for the 14 days? Or
if you exceed that number for one day, it resets. So if we had 21 cases tomorrow, it resets until we get back to 20, and then we have to go another 2 weeks staying below 20.
And then I noticed on that first chart you showed us, I didn't see the city of San Luis on that chart.
On the
Number of cases for each city.
That's very interesting because I pulled that chart right off of Ready Slow, the county's site. That was a good observation.
Yeah, Jonathan, it's missing every other line. So the 554, I believe, is slow. So it's just missing the label for every other bar.
Oh, yes.
Well,
Thank you.
They're right behind us. I see. Okay, good. Well, that was it. Thank you, Jonathan.
Councilman Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No real comment other than the fact that I believe these numbers are truly going to be unachievable. This virus is going to be around for a while, and with the bars that are set here, I don't see how our county is ever going to be able to get back to where we can at least start, especially, with the weather's perfect right now, but in another month or two, we're going to see it change, and the outdoor dining is not going to be as easy to do. And I'm just really concerned about the fact that, the bar that's been set so high here with number of cases, I personally don't think is achievable at this point. So, it's one thing, it's like we're trying to do the best we can, and we still can't make it, that kind of an issue. And that's what I think everybody's going to get so discouraged here. And it's time really at this point, I think the county and all the cities to start to push Sacramento to relax some of these levels that they've set. And people, I think, have understood now that the COVID, there's ways to deal with it, distancing and keep your mask on, and all the issues that we've always been taught to be careful with any kind of virus. People are there now. And again, it is what it is. Until we get this vaccine coming, I think it's going to be unachievable for us to get back to the point where our economy can recover at a faster rate. So it's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Strong.
Yes. No particular questions. I happen to agree with John Hammond at this point, and I would hope that the governor considers that possibly the cure is more damaging than the disease. So we've got to think of that as well.
Thank you, Councilwoman Garcia.
No questions.
Thank you. I also want to add to this report that the COVID coalition that I spoke of a couple of meetings ago, we have about 24 local citizens and organizations who have volunteered to help distribute information, both about safety precautions regarding COVID-19 and also information about businesses that are open and safe. We are working with our other partners, including Travel Paso, the Paso Wine Alliance, Chamber of Commerce, Main Street, to get their information into the hands of these volunteers who are going to help us get the information out to the public. I also want the council and the public to know that I have generated a third letter to the governor of California requesting flexibility and allowing businesses to open indoor operations again, owing also to our low infection rate, our low hospitalization rate, our high recovery rate, and the fact that the wildfires have now impacted outdoor operations that we facilitated for our local businesses. So council members will be seeing copies of that. I encourage you, if you're so inclined, to sign on to it. Supervisor Kushung once again signed on to this request, as other electeds will also. So we are working to deal with that hair-triggered response, which makes it so difficult to comply. It is good to see that the infection rate has declined somewhat. It means we're on the right track. I think it also means that Mr. Hammond is correct. We've learned what we have to learn to deal with this. And if we just continue to apply it in an intelligent fashion, that we can start the recovery process.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
A question to our Tom Frucci. Tom, if we as a council wanted to do a little pushback regarding our local folks here, what do we risk with the state? In other words, what can happen to Paso Robles by relaxing some of on our own here?
So there are a variety of ways to do it. The mayor's letters to the governor, Chief Stornetta is giving us the contact person in the State Office of Emergency Services, because they may be able to assistance to make some changes. Certainly the county has said they support the mayor's letters and support our efforts. So that's always helpful. But if none of those avenues come to fruition and the city decides to do it on its own, we do run some risks. The governor early in the pandemic did bring in some enforcement people at his direction into one county in Northern California that basically said they weren't going to adhere to his roadmap. I have not heard about any recent enhanced enforcement from the state, but certainly if Paso was seen to be out way beyond the norm, that would be a risk. However, I do not believe at this point that Paso is contemplating anything that other cities aren't also contemplating. So, certainly we would, if the council chose to do something, we would try to get you the best possible information on what other communities were doing and what the possible consequences might be.
Well, and I appreciate you as a city manager relaxing the playground. I mean, let our kids out there and play. That was huge, even though we've posted signs saying that, we need to be careful. Things like that, I think, are important to get our people back onto a normal track. We're also seeing locally now, on a nationwide, that the rules are being challenged in the court. Federal court is upholding, these rules, and some are not. And so that's a push. I just, like I said, it wouldn't be so bad that, if there was a bar that we could achieve and we could gain, traction on this, but I truly don't see the way it's set currently that any of our cities are going to be able to make it. So anyway, I'm just trying to explore possibilities here. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from council? Hearing none, do we have anybody in the public who would like to comment on this report?
No, sir.
Thank you. We move on now to item number 2, our capital projects report. Ditas Esperanza.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Warren will start the presentation slides, and then we'll get started. Okay, so next slide, please. So these are pictures. The next few pictures are of Spring Street resurfacing, 24th to 36th. You will see that the paving is complete and the striping is complete. So we have other things that we're working on. The next thing we're working on for Spring Street, we're waiting for the delivery of the ornamental street lights, which is coming from PG&E. And they told us that they expect delivery of those poles sometime in mid-November. In the meantime, we've finished installing the bases for the poles and the electrical wiring, and we're just waiting for PG&E to come on board and start erecting those pole lights. The next project is our 4 million gallon 21st Street water tank. As we've noted with you, we're pretty much in operation. We're still waiting to finish up electrical wiring, backfilling and grading, and then also the paving of 19th Street and the access road. As you can see here from the last report, we've completed backfilling the tank. So it's now quote unquote buried. So below the earth is the tank is 23 feet into the earth, and that's just about done. I'm showing you these pictures because this is the vacant land.
Mr. Hammond, could you mute your mic, please?
Yep.
Okay. If you remember, the old tank was oblong in shape, and so it was lengthwise, and now we just have a round tank. So we have property next to the tank that's vacant where the oblong tank used to be. So we're still doing appurtenant structures and equipment to make this a wholly functional 100% completed tank project. So Union Road along Barney Schwartz Park is pretty much done. We're still waiting for the activated crossing lights. That's supposed to be delivered sometime in early October. So all the striping is complete, surfacing. So where you see the cones, we're waiting for the signal pole to come and deliver. And we did extend the pavement improvement to the city limits of Paso Robles. And the most recent project that's just started is in our downtown area. The first item of work is to install conduits for the future fiber. So that's from 6th Street, from Spring Street to Pine, Park Street 6th to 9th, 10th Street, Vine to Spring, and 8th Street, Spring to Pine. Those conduits are just about done. The conduits itself, the next thing we'll do is install the access manholes, and then we'll start working on the street part. So this is the street repair list. It's pretty much like the conduits. The only difference is that 9th Street is being rehabbed, as well as where the conduits are being put on 6th, 7th, and 6th, 8th, 10th, and Park. So here's a picture of the conduits being installed. The next order of business is for us to do dig out repairs and then do some numerous curb ramp upgrades. And then finally, we will do the pavement restoration. And that, I believe, is the last slide. So if you have any other question, I'll be happy to answer them.
Very good, thank you.
Edith, we get a lot of requests regarding Dry Creek Road. Would you give the council an update on Dry Creek Road and the water lines at the airport, please?
Okay, so the water lines, the North Airport water lines are complete. The piping, the water and sewer in Dry Creek Road is complete. So this Thursday is our first construction meeting with Ramina for the road repair of Dry Creek from airport to Estrella Warbirds. As a reminder, the first thing we need to do is to install conduits for future fiber. There's some drainage improvements that we need to do, and then they will begin the road repair project. So they're going to be mobilizing early next week. They'll start putting the electrical signs at airport and towards Aerotech, just to remind people construction is coming up. So there'll be detours of traffic as that work begins. So that's starting this week, and we'll start getting pretty congested over there in the next few weeks. Anything else?
Okay, we thank you. This is a presentation item. No action is required. Anything else, Tom?
No, sir.
Okay, good. If there are
We can't ask questions.
council comments, Mr. Gregory?
None at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hammond.
None, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Strong.
Yes, I'd like to know, do we know from the county when they're going to start doing any of that work on Jardine, since we're kind of doing a trade-off? We're doing Dry Creek and they're doing Jardine.
Yes. They had their bid opening, and unfortunately, the apparent low bid had some issues with their bids, so they had to throw that out. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of pushback from that contractor. They finally figured it out, and so they're having to award it to the second low bid. And so then that second low bid has to now gear up to be the person that they'll be hiring. So I'm told that, so that delayed the award of the project. So I think they're gonna award it either later this month or early next month, and then that work will begin.
Very good. Do we know what percentage of our road work that we're having done is from grant funds from other places that isn't being paid out of our own money?
I'm sorry, could you please repeat your question?
Of our road work that we're doing, some of it is being paid by grant funds, is it not?
Let me think. No. Union Road was all supplemental sales tax. Spring Street was supplemental sales tax with a little bit of grant because we use rubber. So we had a rubberized grant. The downtown rehab is primarily sales tax and then a little bit of the rubberized grant. But and Dry Creek is all supplemental sales tax.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Garcia?
No, sir, no questions.
Very good, thank you. Do we have anybody in the public who wishes to comment on this report?
No, sir.
Thank you very much. We move on. Item number 3, the Global Water Awards 2020 Wastewater Project of the Year Proclamation. Mr. Matt Thompson is going to be accepting this. Matt, are you with us?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Welcome. We are pleased to make this proclamation, and I will read it now. Whereas in 2014, the city adopted a master plan to produce high-quality recycled water at its wastewater treatment plant and to use the water for irrigation of sports fields, golf courses, and vineyards. And whereas in 2019, the city's wastewater division completed construction of tertiary treatment facilities at the wastewater treatment plant. And whereas the project included many environmentally sustainable features, including ultraviolet light disinfection, filtration, all gravity flow, repurposing of old structures, and a state-of-the-art nutrient harvesting system. Whereas the city is now producing high-quality recycled water and has further reduced its impact on the Salinas River. Whereas the city received a $4 million state grant due to the tertiary project's environmentally innovative features. And whereas in 2020, the California Water Environment Association awarded the tertiary project its Engineering and Research Achievement Award. And whereas in 2020, Global Water Intelligence selected the tertiary project for its Global Water Awards 2020 Wastewater Project of the Year. The project was among a short list of other excellent projects from Egypt, China, and India. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Stephen W. Martin, by virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor and speaking on behalf of the entire city council, do hereby recognize wastewater division staff, design engineer Black and Beach, Cushman Contracting Corporation, and construction manager Cavello Group on the special occasion of these awards and extend our gratitude for their dedicated service to the city of Paso Robles. Quite a feather in our cap. Mr. Thompson, would you like to make some comments?
Yes, thank you for those kind words, Mayor. I would like to thank you and all the council members for your leadership on water issues and infrastructure, and for entrusting your staff to deliver this important project. I want to emphasize this project was truly a team effort. All the people you just mentioned put all their talents and tremendous energy into making it a success. We gladly did so knowing the project would benefit Paso Robles for many decades to come. We're honored to be a part of it and very grateful for this recognition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Any council comments? Mr. Gregory?
Yeah, I'd just like to say congratulations to Matt and your entire team of employees and everybody that helped on the project. It's truly amazing. Thank you.
Mr. Hammond?
Just say well done, Matt, and all your staff. Well done. Great job.
Mr. Strong?
Yes, kudos, because that is not an easy award to get. That is an outstanding award. Congratulations.
And Ms. Garcia?
Yes, sir. I just want to say congratulations, and I really like that our team, they work as a team, and this is what happens. Thank you.
And again, my thanks to all the folks involved. This is a great accomplishment for you and your team, and certainly reflects very well on the city of Paso Robles on the international level. So thank you very much. We move on now to item number 4, micro grant presentation. Mr. Sloan.
Paul, you want me to run the presentation?
Yeah, if you can launch it from there, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, hang on a sec. Let me get it up. There you go.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Frace. Well, good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name is Paul Sloan, Economic Development Manager for the City of Paso Robles. And this evening, I'll be presenting information on the CARES Act Small Business Relief Grant Program. As background, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, also known as the CARES Act, is a $2 trillion economic stimulus bill that was signed into law in March of 2020 in response to the economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. The CARES Act provided direct assistance to local governments with populations of 500,000 or more. Smaller cities can only get funding through states via their federal allocations. The state of California determined that funds for cities of less than 300,000 people would be allocated on a per capita basis. And under the state's allocation, the city of Paso Robles received $385,490. On July 21st, 2020, Council approved the use of $200,000 of the CARES Act funds for a small business assistance program. And subsequently, the city of Paso Robles created a COVID-19 small business grant program utilizing the $200,000 in federal CARES Act funds to provide one-time grant funding for small businesses in Paso Robles. The program was created to support local economic recovery by helping businesses address COVID-19 impacts and to help them retain their employees. The program was announced on August 7th, and the deadline to apply for a grant from this program was August 23rd. Next slide, please. The criteria for the program included having an active business license in the city of Paso Robles. The program was limited to small businesses with 25 or fewer employees. They must have completed a San Luis Obispo County self-certification form for businesses that are allowed to reopen. They must be able to demonstrate a clear need for grant funding to support operations. Additional considerations included the number of employees or jobs supported, the ability to open under public health guidelines, and adhering to public health guidelines. That is, no current infractions on file. And also considered was a variety of business sectors, types, and locations. Next slide. The city received over 100 applications with grant requests totaling over $1 million, far exceeding the $200,000 in available CARES Act funds for the program. Each application was carefully reviewed by a selection committee to ensure each grantee met the program criteria. In total, 33 local businesses in various locations and ranging in size from 1 to 21 employees were selected to receive a grant. These grant funds support a combined total of 209 local jobs across a variety of business sectors, including food service, child daycare, hair salons, retail, nonprofit, tech services, and more. In accordance with CARES Act guidelines, the grant funds can be used for documented business operations expenses such as rent or mortgage, payroll, utilities, insurance, loan payments related to running the businesses, and etc. All grantees and non-grantees have now been notified, and we are on track to have all grant funds dispersed by the end of September. Grant recipients will be required to provide basic reporting to the city on how grant funds were utilized. And that's the end of my report. So thank you, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you very much. Questions, Mr. Gregory?
Very nice report, Paul. Thank you. Must be fun to give out money like that.
Except for the folks who don't get the funds.
I agree with that.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I said I agree with that last comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hammond?
Yeah, Paul, a question. Will there be any more funding coming forth from the state? Actually, it comes from the federal government to the state. And I guess this was one of my earlier questions. to Tom Frucci was that, if our city were to push the envelope as far as restrictions from the state, would these kind of funds be in jeopardy? In other words, could the state hold back funding to our various cities that do not want to play along, so to speak, with the rules?
I will leave that to the city manager to answer the question, but this last go round, it definitely came through the state to determine how the funds were allocated. If Mr. Frucci wants to answer.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, Councilmember Hammond, the state did indicate early on in this process that in order to receive any of the CARES Act funds, you had to certify that you were in fact adhering to all state guidelines. We did that. Now, if after the fact we were to not adhere to the guidelines, the state would certainly be within its rights to claw back the money. And if we'd already given out the funds, then the general fund would be subject to repaying that.
Okay, well, that's what I was asking. If we decided to change our ways a little bit, the funds that we've already received and dispersed could be in jeopardy where we may have to repay that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Strong.
No questions. I think a very nice presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia.
Yes, sir. I had a question on the report. I was looking at the categories, expenses by categories. Is there any way, well, like Mr. Hammond was asking if we would be able to qualify to get more funds, and if we could show, is there a way we could show the need for the different categories?
The need, I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Our community need, like on the categories, it has food programs and housing support. Is there a way we could show that? Would we have those numbers available if more money were to be allocated? Where we could show them that that is a need that we have in our community?
So, Paul, I'll go ahead and address that.
Yeah.
If the state and people have requested that the state do its own second round of small business assistance allocations to the cities, if the state were to do that, we could easily demonstrate that we have businesses that meet all state criteria and are in need. It was a difficult process for the 4 committee members because we had a large number of very good applications. And so they adhered to those criteria and awarded those, for example, that showed them, in some cases, the most employees that would be able to be retained. So, but we had plenty of other applications.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to say, I sat on that panel, and while it was good to be able to provide support to our businesses, it was also painful because the $200,000 that was afforded for this was oversubscribed by 5 times. And everyone on that list was a good business. And we set up a series of criteria regarding number of employees, business sectors, et cetera, and tried to apply the fairest criteria possible to allocate these funds. And we certainly hope that somewhere down the road, not too far down the road, more support is made available so we can continue to support our local businesses. This is a presentation item. No action is required. Do we have anybody in the public that would like to comment?
No, sir.
Very good. We'll move on now to general public comments. General public comments is a time the public can address the council on items within the council's purview, but not scheduled on the agenda tonight. So please begin by stating your name and address. Each person is limited to 3 minutes. Any person or subject requiring more than 3 minutes may be scheduled for a future council meeting or referred to committee or staff. Those persons wishing to speak on any item scheduled on the agenda tonight will be given an opportunity to do so at the time that item is being considered. I want to remind folks the number to call is 805-865-7276. And if you do encounter difficulties being connected, please try again because there may be other folks that have called in ahead of you. So at this time, we will open general public comments. I will ask if we have anyone online who would like to make a general public comment.
Yes, sir. The first caller is Gail McNichols.
Welcome, Gail.
Thank you very much, Council. My name is Gail McNichols, 849 Hacienda Circle, Paso Robles, California. And I have several comments and questions relative to prior council discussions, specifically regarding the creation of the Borky Flats encampment. I'm interested in funding that the city has spent on initial camp setup and the weekly expenses. How many homeless have been relocated to the encampment, and what has been the daily average census? And I'm excluding the safe parking program from those numbers. So basically, my question is, what is this camp costing per person based upon campers actually using the encampment? My understanding is that at a prior city council meeting, it was revealed that the Borky Flats area is in a flood zone and will need to be relocated. And if so, is there a timeline and an estimated cost for moving that camp, and where might that be relocated to? And lastly, my questions are relative to COVID and the homeless. Are there an adequate number of hand washing stations throughout the area where the majority of the homeless live, and who is responsible for maintaining water sources at those stations? What is the city planning on doing to mitigate this winter? In terms of every year, we seem to have swift water rescues and continue problems with river buildup. And I know the city has spent a tremendous amount of time and energy and money cleaning up those camps now, but the buildup occurs relatively quickly. It's a reoccurring problem. And so based upon past fiscal impacts, what is the anticipated cost going to be? And these questions, of course, are relative to just fiscal impacts for the city. Thank you very much for your time.
Very good. Thank you for your questions, and we will try to get you some answers here. Please keep listening. Who is next on the list?
All right. Thank you, sir.
We have someone else waiting.
Next caller is Jan Albin.
Welcome, Jan.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much. My comments tonight are on the proposed sales tax increase. At the September 1st City Council meeting, the city manager did an entire monologue on what he termed the public perception challenge. You can listen to that about an hour in on the YouTube replay. And quite honestly, that is a huge problem. You have a proposed sales tax increase on the ballot directed to the general fund. Times are hard and we're all struggling. And even more today, we do not trust the city to do what's in the best interest of the people with the general fund money. I see our financial deficit as an opportunity to see just how willing and cooperative our city council and city staff can be for the good of us all. Corporations know that in tough times, everyone in every department trims the fat. Before they actually cut people, they cut hours and perks. They cut department spending, they cut office supply requisitions. Then and only then, they initiate small incremental pay cuts starting at the top. In the private sector, people do what they need to do to keep from going out of business. In the public sector, they do what they need to do to protect their paycheck. Your sales tax increase initiative will fail unless you can convince the public that everyone from the top down is making a financial sacrifice. Because so far, watching how the city has failed to cut spending within their own walls does not instill faith in the public that this mentality will change anytime soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments. Who do we have next?
Next is Michael Rivera.
Welcome, Mr. Rivera.
Hello, Mr. Mayor, council members. I come to you tonight unfortunately, because I'm so disturbed about what's happening in this city. You know, we have, and I want to clarify this. I want to make sure that I've got this right. There was an Elena Garcia that made comments related to a piece that Chris Aaron wrote just recently, which, by the way, I've read. I would suggest the rest of you read if you haven't. If you haven't read it, you should, because it reinforces my position for a long time now that we're a post-racial country. Now, what really disturbs me about this is if it is Miss Garcia that I'm thinking of, she has basically said that she was embarrassed and ashamed about Mr. Aaron's arrogance. I mean, it goes on in the Tribune article. It's really sad. It's really sad that a man who simply writes something that's very, very well done has a lot of bibliography, so you can research his points, that it would be attacked as being something that is out of the mainstream. Let me explain something. What is out of the mainstream is Black Lives Matter. This is a racist organization, a organization that has been linked to attacks on our police officers, burning of buildings. It is a anti-Semitic. It is a organization that is Marxist and is antithetical to everything that the people of this city stand for, the mainstream stands for in this city. I've been here a long time, and I can assure you that that the folks of Black Lives Matter do not in any way represent the people of this city, or I believe this county, or for that matter, people in general. So I would hope, and this diversity committee, this diversity panel, in my view, is unneeded. If any resources are being spent on this, I think it ought to be withdrawn, and I'm very, very concerned. This is going to tear this city apart. And if we're going to attack people for writing pieces that are very well thought out and brought to bear in the public arena, and all we're going to do is call people's names, I think we've got a real problem here in our little community. This cancer has to stop. This cancer is permeating into small communities like this now. And you, as representatives of the people of this community, need to stop this. And if you don't, I fear for the future of this little community.
Thank you, sir.
I'm hoping that you will take and heed my comments. I appreciate having the time. I have more comments, but I'll put them in writing and send them to the city manager.
Thank you, sir.
Next caller is Sally Reynolds.
Welcome, Sally.
Welcome, City Council and Mayor. I know that we have to do virtual City Council meetings. I don't like it, but I know we have to do that. So several times when I am listening to the City Council meeting, I hear things I shouldn't hear. And I'm asking the City Council, since you know that this starts at 6:30, to please have your dinner before or have your dinner after. But we do not need to hear you eating while we're listening to the council. That's just a really irritating thing. So I'm asking the council, please don't eat while you're having a meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Who's next?
That is all the callers for general public comment.
Thank you very much. We will close general public comment, try to get some answers here. I want to hit the high points on the Borky Flats question. I would invite our caller to check with city staff and get any detailed answers offline, but let's go through some of this. Mr. City Manager, you want to comment on the funding and expense of that facility and how it's been utilized?
Mr. Mayor, I certainly could, but Julie Dolan is our overall project and program coordinator for that. She has the best feel for, I think, the broad range of questions that were asked. So I'd ask her to go ahead and answer your question.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Mayor Martin. Yes, first I'd like to thank Gail McNichols for calling in. She's been a longtime partner through Paso Cares and has really done a lot to assist the city in addressing homelessness. And in light of the fact that Gail has asked a good many questions, my intention is going to be to contact her tomorrow after I've received some additional information about funding. As I jotted down notes here, Gail is asking about the cost per person served. So I'll need some time to determine those figures. But the fact of the matter is the camp has not served as many people as we had hoped and anticipated. For a time, Paso Cares was serving hot meals at the Borky site and the attendance picked up a little bit. But I would say at most we've had maybe 6 to 8 people camping there. And there are some additional RVs that are parked on the site, which was not our original intention. So we continue to address that in a way that is humane, but also does make sure that the city is adhering to policy. We are aware of the fact that Borky Flats is considered a floodplain, and so the plan is to discontinue service at that site for a safety reason for people who might be utilizing it. And the timeline for that is that we intend to cease operations no later than November 1st. I have initiated monthly meetings now with our partners in Paso Cares and ECHO, with our CAT team, and we are currently talking about what alternatives might exist to, again, serve the needs of the homeless during inclement weather. So again, I would invite Gail, even if she would choose to participate in those meetings, so that she could have the most up-to-date information. We are aware of COVID considerations. We do have hand washing stations at the site. We have been in very frequent communication with Laurel Weir, the county homeless coordinator, and she's been very helpful in providing us with advice. For example, when we had a heat wave, whether or not it was safe to use fans and misters on the site. So we are doing our level best to follow protocols out there. So that's what I'm able to answer on site for Gail McNichols' questions. But as I said, I'd be happy to give her a call tomorrow and follow up on her other issues.
Thank you. Do we have anybody from public safety that would like to comment on the winter situation? Obviously, we've had issues in the past about flooding and how that affects people down there and the impact on our services.
Mayor Martin, this is Jonathan Stornetta, the fire chief. I can answer that question, and then real quickly, we do have the costs because Battalion Chief Randy Harris is the one that started this project. So initial cost, one-time fee, setup and purchases was $11,555, and ongoing monthly cost is $19,853 a month. As far as the public safety concerns, as noted, for the last few years, we've had numerous river rescues in that area where the homeless are, mostly between Niblick and north of the city limits. 2 years ago, we had just over 12 rescues utilizing helicopters and mutual aid support from throughout the county. We do have concerns about the current Borky Flats location because it is at a lower level, and that area does tend to flood come wintertime, and the city is working on alternative ideas prior to November 1st of relocating the shelter or providing other assistance to the homeless.
Very good. Thank you for that information. I would ask that you do make an effort to follow up with Gail, because I'm sure she has more in-depth questions. It will take you a little bit more time to research, but we appreciate the information you were able to give us this evening. Mr. Rivera had questions, I don't think directly relating to the city. I'm going to read between the lines and assume that he was concerned that our councilwoman was the source of comments about the article he referenced. Maria, I don't think that's the case, is it?
No, sir, it's not me.
Very good. Thank you. And then there was a concern about city expenditures for the diversity panel. I can tell everyone the city is not spending a cent on that. That's my panel. I put it together. I do not ask any assistance from city staff. Everything is being done on a volunteer basis, so that is not costing the taxpayers anything. And last but not least, eating dinner during the meeting. I don't know who is, but please don't. Thank you. Okay, moving on. I will ask the city manager if we have any agenda items to be deferred this evening.
Mr. Mayor, with your forbearance, I'd like to address that and two other quick items.
Sure.
Number one, no, sir, we do not have any items to be deferred. Number two, I just want the public to know that we received hundreds of emails regarding an item later in the agenda, item number 15. And it's important that the public is aware that if you send your emails directly to the council, that they do not appear in the addendum, because the assumption is the council's already read them in their receipt. And I know many of the council members took hours and hours and hours responding to those emails. So the emails that get included in the addendum are those that come into the city clerk, as is the instructions the mayor read to begin the meeting. Just want to make sure people understand that. And then third, it did not appear on the agenda just due to a software issue. But at the end of the meeting, as part of council comments and activities, we will be taking a few minutes for the council and others who may wish to call in to share memories of Ed Steinbeck, who unfortunately passed away last week. And the council will also be adjourning the meeting in his honor.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So we will move on now to the consent calendar. Items on the consent calendar are considered routine, not requiring separate discussion. However, if discussion is wanted by a member of the council or public, that item may be removed from the consent calendar and considered separately. Council members and members of the public may offer comments or ask questions of clarification without removing an item from the calendar. Individual items are approved by the vote that approves the consent calendar unless an item is pulled for separate consideration. Items pulled from the consent calendar are usually placed at the end of the meeting. So I will ask now from our council members if there are clarifying questions or any items to be pulled from the consent calendar. Mr. Gregory.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hammond.
None, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Strong.
No questions. I think Mr. Pucci will tell the public what we're doing, because there's some wonderful things we're doing in this consent agenda tonight.
Thank you. Ms. Garcia?
No, sir, no questions.
Thank you. And I have no questions. Do we have anybody online to comment or question for the consent calendar?
No, sir.
Very good. I will bring it back to the council and entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I move that we approve items 5 through 13 on the consent agenda, please.
Second.
I have a motion. Motion by Councilman Gregory, seconded by Councilman Strong. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Gregory?
Aye.
Councilmember Strong?
Aye.
Councilmember Garcia?
Aye.
Councilmember Hammond?
Aye.
Mayor Martin?
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. I will ask the city manager now to give us a brief report on these items, so folks listening in who have not seen the agenda, which I will remind folks is available at the city website, prcity.com, will know what actions we've taken as part of the consent calendar tonight.
Thank you, Your Honor. On its consent calendar this evening, the council approved the city council minutes from September 1st. The council received the warrant register, and warrants are the checks the city writes to pay for the goods and services it receives. The warrant register this 2-week period totaled $3.6 million. That's higher than normal, but there are reasons that I'll explain briefly. First, there was two payments regarding Spring Street project that totaled $1.7 million. There was $250,000 in payments for the annual slurry seal project, $250,000 for a variety of utility bills at various city facilities, $210,000 for water-related improvements, and $190,000 for wastewater-related improvements. So the actual general fund expenditure was fairly normal and for this period of time, and actually lower than would otherwise be the case given the pandemic and the city's restriction on expenditures. The council also received advisory body meeting minutes from the Airport Commission for its meeting of May 28th. The council accepted on behalf of the city 2 grants from FEMA that were applied for by the Emergency Services Department. Thank you, Chief Stornetta and Charlie Brown. One was for both portable radios and mobile radios for firefighters and our moving apparatus. Not all of our firefighters even had radios that were assigned to them, and that makes things difficult during a challenging response. And in addition, the department applied for and received reimbursement for some of the personal protective equipment and other supplies that have been consumed during the pandemic. So these are just two of the grants that the department has recently applied for, and I think we're likely to, on your next agenda, to have two more to announce and have the council accept if it chooses. And there is a small match, about an 8% match on these two. So for the $89,000 worth of grants, there's an $8,000 city match. So almost an 11 to 1, 12 to 1 payment there, leverage of our money. That's really good. Thank you, Chief. The council also accepted two final maps, one for track 3155 and one for track 3152. And those are both within the Olson South Chandler specific plan area. And the acceptance of these maps creates the large lots for different development phases for the open space dedication and for other land uses. And it's a necessary step after the council's approval of the project before a lot of other things can proceed. So the council authorized the staff to work with the developer to create these final maps. Thanks to the city engineer's work and work of others, we now are able to accept those. So that's a great step forward to bring housing and affordable housing to the city. The council approved a memorandum of understanding with the Housing Authority regarding affordable housing in the Olson South Chandler specific plan. And so as the council remembers, one of the very first areas to be improved, we were able to negotiate the opportunity to build affordable housing through a local effort to be able to get quality housing at lower cost than would otherwise be the case. And the Housing Authority stepped forward, and this memorandum of understanding allows them to pursue development of 60 to 85 affordable units. And there is a timeline, so they must take title by October 1st, 2022, or else it reverts to the city to do. And if we are not able to do it, then it would revert back to the developer. But we're very hopeful the Housing Authority can proceed and provide this badly needed housing. The council also approved a termination agreement for a lease with Atlas Commercial Products at the train station at 800 Pine Street. And as the council remembers, this is an event planning firm that initiated their lease at our train station in early March, just before the pandemic started. So horribly unfortunate timing for them. They have not been able to make a go of it. And so they did ask us to allow them to exit the lease, and we negotiated something that they're actually paying more than they would have liked. We're granting them some things, and our realtors have also given us a discount in the next leasing of that because of the unfortunate vacancies. So everyone had to suffer a little bit, and it's really unfortunate that the pandemic caused this business to not succeed. And then finally, the council approved on its consent calendar an update on the use of CARES Act funds, and that included not only the microgrant program that Mr. Sloan reported on, but also the council's authorization for up to $20,000 for education outreach on COVID-19, and the partial reimbursement for about $175,000 of the expenses the city has incurred as a result of COVID-19. And that is the consent calendar this evening, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. We move on now to public hearings. Item number 14, continuation of an item, Beechwood Specific Plan P12-0002 et al. Mr. Frace.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. This item, you'll recall, was continued from your last agenda to this agenda because it was not ready for hearing. It is still not ready for hearing. Staff's recommendation is to continue it once again to the October 6th City Council meeting.
Very good. In that case, do we need to open public comment on this?
We believe not.
Can we get an opinion from the city attorney?
Correct. You do not need to open the public comment for the public hearing since you're just continuing the item.
Thank you. Unless there are other issues to surface, I would solicit a motion to continue this item.
I'll move we continue to October 6th.
Hammond seconds.
Motion by Councilman Gregory, second by Councilman Hammond. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Gregory,
Aye.
Councilmember Hammond,
Aye.
Councilmember Garcia,
Aye.
Councilmember Strong,
Aye.
Mayor Martin.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Item number 15 is a discussion item, actions to further reduce and prioritize operating costs. Mr. Frucci.
Thank you, Your Honor. And Warren, if you would please bring the presentation up on the screen.
One moment.
Hi. I'm in a city council meeting right now. Would you like to talk to Grandma? Hang on. Just hold it up to your ear and talk. Go in the other room, please. Okay.
So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this is an item that the council requested that we bring back this evening, and you requested it at your September 1st meeting. Next slide, please. And this is all related to the fiscal challenges the city is facing, both as a result of our ongoing and sustained structural deficit, as well as the pandemic. And for a variety of reasons, the city does not have the revenues on an ongoing basis to fund its highest priority services at the required levels. And so you see here just a few examples. Emergency services is past needing based on federal standards, as well as response times in our community. A third engine, we do not have it. We have only 2 engines and a squad on duty at any point in time. In addition, we need additional police officers and support staff to provide the safety of our community. Property crimes are rising, and we are above average throughout the state for property crimes, both because of increased drug use as well as the state's early release program for nonviolent offenders. And so that is having an impact on our community, which we need to deal with. And then finally, we are spending more than $5 million a year on our streets, but it is by no means enough. We are continuing to see deterioration of our streets, and the longer we let them deteriorate, the more it's going to cost us in the long run to repair. So recently, the council has taken a series of actions to address these fiscal challenges. First, it did, in its adoption of the fiscal year 2021 budget. If you go back to that prior slide just for a second, Warren, thank you. It did approve $7.4 million in budget reductions, as well as drawing down reserves by $5.7 million. It did place a measure on the ballot, Measure J20, and it did ask us at the September 1st meeting to come back with what it called Plan A and Plan B. And I'll talk about each of those 3 items just in a little bit more detail. Next slide, please. So you see here the changes the council made to what would otherwise have been the budget this year in order to achieve the $7.4 million worth of savings. And they are both some program reductions or eliminations, some project deferrals or eliminations, as well as some reductions in compensation and employees. So that those total on that page achieved the $7.4 million savings. And as I said, the council also directed us to withdraw $5.7 million of reserves. Next slide, please. In terms of Measure J20, which has been placed on the ballot, the measure's asking this question of the voters, and it addresses the high priority essential services of the city, as well as other possibilities to achieve about a $10 million annual increase in revenues, of which about 40% would be paid for by visitors to the community. And as the council is well aware, members of the community hopefully are all TOT revenues to the city are provided by visitors, and about 40% of our both base sales tax as well as the supplemental sales tax is provided by visitors. So it's a very good leverage of our residents' tax revenues in order to achieve a balanced budget and start chipping away at the structural deficit. Next slide, please. And then finally, on September 1st, the council asked us to come back with 2 plans for additional reductions and reallocations of expenditures. And so Plan B, which was the first one talked about last week, the basic question is, if Measure J20 doesn't pass at the November ballot, what changes to the budget, what reductions or reallocations would be needed in fiscal year 21-22? And based on a series of assumptions that Ryan Cornell, our Administrative Services Director, has calculated, the reduction that would be necessary in next year, starting July 1, 2021, would be $3.3 million. And that's Plan B. Plan A is if the city were to start addressing the fiscal challenges now and initiating reallocations to minimize the underfunding of the high priority services, how would it do it? And the council gave direction that staff should look in the range of $1.5 to $2.5 million of reductions over and above the $7.4 million that the council already authorized, that would go into effect as quickly as could be affected this fiscal year, so fiscal year 2020, 2021. And before we go on to the next slide, it's important for those people who may not have had a chance to look at the staff report tonight, that given that the $1.5 to $2.5 million of additional reductions in Plan A were for the remainder of this fiscal year, that equates roughly to the same as the $3.3 million annual reduction that would start July 1st, 2021. So they're really, in some sense, the same plan, the same types of reductions would be needed. The key differences being in Plan A, it would start this year, not wait until July 1st, 2021. And then secondly, because this year, as far as we can tell at this point, although it's very early in the year, we do have a balanced budget. If the council were to initiate Plan A, it would not have to do the entire plan. It could do part of it. Plan B, $3.3 million of reductions would be necessary to maintain a balanced budget in 21-22 if additional resources were not taken from reserves, or if the economy didn't improve dramatically, those kinds of things. But Plan A does not have to be implemented in full if the council so chose. It could do a part of Plan A. Next slide, please. So here's the current general fund budget by department. And as it's important to emphasize this, the departments have dramatically different budget sizes. So our police department has the largest budget in the city. It's almost a quarter of the entire general fund budget in the city. The fire department, emergency services department, is second with 16%. And I'd like to stop right there because obviously those two largest departments are, based on all the polling we've done over the years, two of the three highest priorities that our residents say. They want to ensure that we have adequate police officers and support services. They want to ensure we have an appropriate emergency response, both for fires and for medical emergencies. And then the third priority is they want to ensure that our streets are well maintained. As you'll see in this chart, some of our other large functions like our water utility and our wastewater utility and our airport are not included in this chart because they are paid through rates or fees for service. So they aren't paid for out of the general fund, and that's a key point. Next largest department is the community services department at almost 15% of the overall general fund. And then the other departments trail from there. It's important to note that the four smallest departments, administrative service, community development, public works, and city council, city manager, barely total the same as the police department. So there's just quite a difference in scale amongst the departments. Next slide, please. So the guidelines that the staff used in developing the plans, the two plans, both Plan A and Plan B, were to, as directed by the council, minimize impacts on the highest priority services. And the council actually identified those in specific. It was police, it was fire, it was streets, it was water and wastewater. Clearly the water and wastewater, because they're not part of the general fund, are not included in this analysis that's coming back to you tonight, but all the other general fund services and functions are included. Ways that could be done, because so much of our general fund budget is based on personnel. If it not only are the compensation to personnel, but it's providing an office and operating supplies. So they're very much in the general fund, at least, because we are a service-based organization, position related. And so we could accomplish the reductions called for by the two plans, either through position reductions, furloughs, and for those who aren't familiar with how that's done, for example, some cities have already implemented furloughs by, for example, asking employees to work one less day a month, or shutting down City Hall between Christmas and New Year's. So that is impacting both the employees. They're receiving the same dollars per hour, but are making less money in total. It's also impacting the hours for which they can provide services to the public. And then the third overall method is compensation reduction. So a reduction in salary, a reduction in some other kind of either before tax or after tax, a part of their compensation scheme. And those presented in that line are to some extent independent. However, an alternative could be crafted where there's a mixture, either for a given employee or one approach such as position reduction used in one department and another approach such as furloughs used in another department. So for instance, we could not use furloughs or position reductions in the emergency services department because it's absolutely imperative that we have the minimum staffing we now have to ensure that both of our fire engines and our squad are functional 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. If the method chosen is not straight position reductions, we are absolutely required to do meet and confer with our employees and our bargaining units first. That's state law, and certainly that's the way we would do it anyways to ensure that we're working with our employees and not trying to balance the budget on their backs totally. And then finally, because we're so leanly staffed, the latest numbers were down to about 173 positions. Any of these alternatives is going to have some kind of an impact on service quality and quantity. We cannot, for example, reduce positions without reducing services to our public, because we can't pile the work that the positions that have been reduced onto other positions without impacting those people and the services that they provide. Next slide, please. So in addition to those three approaches we just talked about, there are other alternatives the council could direct us to either analyze or implement. So our reserve level policy at the moment is to not let reserves during this fiscal year go below 30%. The ongoing minimum reserve policy of the council is 20%. There are certain and important reasons why the council chose 30% through this June 30th. We can get into if the council would like. Certainly there's would be, if measure J20 were to pass in November, there would be additional supplemental sales tax revenues that could be used for the high priority, primarily the high priority functions that are identified in the measure as we saw on an earlier slide, and other alternatives that the council may want to consider. Next slide, please. So the recommendation this evening, Your Honor, members of the council, is that we continue the efforts you've already directed us to undertake to ensure we are achieving maximum budget savings and reprioritizing our budget to ensure that the maximum funds are going to the highest priority services. That includes, and we are already underway with meet and confer sessions with the labor groups, and that would be in order to achieve changes that are made necessary by the pandemic, by our structural deficit, by other factors, to ensure that we are to the best extent possible meeting resident priorities. And then that you also direct us to prepare for the potential implementation of Plan B. And the reason that recommendation is worded that way is because based on what we know now, we can finish this fiscal year within the budget that was approved by council. It's very early, and we certainly don't want to make final decisions until Mr. Cornell is able to bring back to you in your second meeting in October his first quarterly report. But there's certainly nothing we know of at the moment that would indicate that we can't end this year with the budget that you already adopted. But we this year adopted only a one-year budget. You adopted a one-year budget, and therefore, if you direct us to prepare now for the potential implementation of Plan B, we can design a budget process that makes maximum use of the time to explore our options, to explore alternatives, to look at other ways of accomplishing what we need to accomplish to achieve the $3.3 million savings starting July 1st, 21-22. And with that, Your Honor, open for any questions the council may have.
Thank you very much. This is obviously going to be a very important discussion. A lot of people anticipating it tonight. As you mentioned earlier, many emails generated over the last 2 weeks, and we've tried to answer each one. And I certainly have directed people to tonight's meeting to become a part of the conversation. So after council questions staff, we will go to public comment. And I want to tell you right now, the number to call is 805-865-7276. And if you have trouble getting through, just keep calling, because we're going to keep filling that queue up. With that, we will start with questions from the council of staff. Mr. Gregory.
Yeah, Tom, just I have two questions. How many staff members have been reduced since we started in March?
Mr. Cornell?
So we haven't reduced any positions. What we have done is done an extended a hiring freeze. So those are those positions that have vacated because of turnover, and we have a kind of a very slow, at least previously, game plan on our timeline on rehiring those positions to get additional savings this year.
So between 10 and 15 people have been reduced from lack of refilling their positions.
Another way to word that, Ryan, is how many vacancies do we currently have?
It's a handful in general fund. I don't know the exact number, but I'd say right around 5 or 6.
Well, may I question that? Because I know we were looking at 2 phases, and I think phase 1 had 8 vacancies and that were going to be filled in either the enterprise funds or the high priority programs like police and fire. And then the second phase was also 8. So that's at least 16 positions. And I know we've had some turnover since then. Are you really saying that only 4 or 5 of those are in the general fund?
Thanks for selling out. Was pulling up the actual list. So you're right. It is closer to the 10 to 12 marker. A lot of there are quite a few positions that are in the enterprise funds that are currently vacant.
And my other question is, can we please show Plan B on the screen while this discussion goes on?
Is that the slide you're referring to, Councilmember, or is there something else you're referring to?
Do you have a breakdown of Plan B?
By department?
Yes.
I believe we have that. Yes, sir. Give us a minute to, while we're answering other questions, to pull that up.
Thank you. Those are all the questions I have right now. I want to save it for the public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hammond?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, Tom and Ryan, again, essentially what you're showing us is that our adopted budget at this point in time will take us all the way through to next year to the end of June. July 1, though, is really where Plan B is going to be coming into effect. Is that basically, for everybody's edification, is that kind of where we're at right now?
Certainly, the longer we wait to do reductions, the bigger those reductions have to be. But there is no reason at this point to believe, at least for this fiscal year, we can't meet the budget. Now, that's a pretty low bar, because that means we're still underfunding the high priority functions that the residents have been telling us in the various surveys. But the council could choose to leave this year's budget alone altogether, or to wait until after the first quarter report at your second meeting in October before making any changes, or you could direct us to make changes now. However, absolutely, we will need to make changes no later than the budget for next year because of the shortfalls we're expecting.
Right, and we usually do that toward the end of the first quarter of next year, correct?
We try to start the budget process in January with typically a council session on overall goals for the year, overall vision, and then you give us direction, and we start coming back to you in February with basic parameters and options. So you keep making greater and finer refinements before adopting the budget either in May or early June.
All right. So again, to me, again, important information to have accurate data coming in, and with Ryan's financial data, it's always lagging behind from the state. And really, from what it sounds like, then the meeting in October is going to be really the first accurate look at what our revenue is during this first, or actually fiscal year that we're in currently, and it would be the latter part of the COVID event. And I'm thinking again that, I don't personally want to make any decisions at this point. I like what we've got in plan, but when we get into it, basically, there's a choice that I think the public's going to have to make, with regard to reduction in services. That's really what all of our people do. Everything we basically employ here provides service to the public. And we've seen a lot of testimony about how they don't want things cut. So it's a quandary of how we're going to deal with it. And I think, when we get into the weeds here a little bit further, we'll have to make those decisions, council will. But at this point, my questions are pretty much set. Maybe further questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Strong?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. First question I have is, just so we understand what our legalities are, we do have contracts because most of our people are in unions as required by state law, and we have contracts with them. Are those enforceable contracts?
Kimberly?
Or can we just ignore the contract?
No, you cannot just ignore the contracts. There's certain reopener provisions, but they are enforceable contracts.
Very good. Okay, thank you. I think that's an important thing for everybody to know, especially the public. And then we talked about we have a policy of a 30% reserve this year. That's by resolution, isn't it?
So the council adopts fiscal policies, and one of your fiscal policies is to review those fiscal policies every year. This year, in your update of your fiscal policies and part of your budget, you did direct staff to not take reserves below 30%, but you do adopt both fiscal policies and the budget by resolution. You can change that by resolution at any time you choose.
Okay, hasn't our policy in the past been specifically 20% for many years?
I'm not sure I'd say many years. A while back, it was at 15%. The council did take it to 20%. And for those who aren't familiar with the purpose of reserves, they actually have multiple purposes. One is to smooth cash flow for the city because our bills come in at a much different rate than our revenues. We get revenues primarily just a few times a year from the state and the county, but our bills are on an ongoing basis, so we need reserves. Our reserves are also in case of any kind of a physical or other emergency, natural emergencies such as an earthquake or wildfire or a pandemic. The reserves are also used for any bonding we do, any debt we undertake. We need our reserves to demonstrate our ability to pay that debt back. And so given that the pandemic was not a risk that anyone anticipated and that we are still at the same risk and overdue for wildfire as well as an earthquake, I'm knocking on wood and unfortunate to say, the council felt because we could not during the adoption of the budget know how long this pandemic was going to last. The council wanted to keep reserves at 30% because in just 2 more years of reducing reserves by 5.7, we would be very low reserve levels. And at that point, the council didn't want to take that risk.
Okay, thank you. And do you happen to have handy or know what our percentage of a reserve we had in 2003 when the last earthquake occurred?
I certainly do not. Ryan has an amazing head for figures. He may know.
Give me a second.
Mr. Mayor, you may want to go on with additional questions, and Ryan can bring that back when he finds it.
Okay, Fred, do you have something else while he's searching for that?
Well, I think that Councilman Hammond brought up that, because I was going to ask how sure are we that our assumptions are correct for all of this, and I think he already brought up that we're not totally sure, and maybe we're going to take another look at it in October, in the second meeting of October. Is that correct?
Yes. So to answer that question, and because it may, the public may not be aware why we don't have better numbers here in the middle of September. TOT, we are generally up to 60 days before we know exactly what's happened because of the law in terms of when hotels and other occupancies are required to submit their TOT statements and taxes. But the worst one is sales tax. The state generally gives us information only fully a quarter behind. And even then, it's very difficult to decipher because there are so many exceptions and adjustments and readjustments that the state makes. So unfortunately, unlike a private sector business or personal household, it is very difficult for us to give you a good feel of where our revenues are trending until at least a quarter has expired. And Mr. Strong, you're absolutely right. We'll be able to give you even better data after 2 quarters have expired.
Okay, thank you very much. So if he come up with that answer about 2003, that's fine. If not, it's not essential. Now, all of these Plan B cuts come to about 3.3 million. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And if we went from 30% reserves to 20% reserve, that's about 3.5 million. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you, Councilwoman Garcia.
Yes, sir. I just want to make sure that I heard the report, the staff report correctly. So on my notes here, I have that since March 1st, we have not have not had staff reduction. We did do the hiring freeze, and there is 10 to 12 vacancies. And that we are now just trying to have a plan for 2021. Is that correct?
If I could answer back in my own words, just to make sure we're on the same page, I'd appreciate that. So we're currently down to 173 FTEs, and that's considerably below what we've had previously. So when Mr. Cornell indicated we hadn't reduced any positions since March 1st, we haven't actually reduced any positions, but we have fewer people because we have vacancies that have arisen in the last 6 months that we haven't filled. So we actually have fewer staff on the payroll while still providing the same services. But you're absolutely right in terms of position reductions, budgetary position reductions. The council has not taken any formal action since adoption of this year's budget.
Okay, thank you.
And, Mr. Mayor, if I could jump in and talk about Mr. Strong's questions.
Sure.
Real quick, based on the CAFR from 2003, it looks like general fund had about $7.4 million worth of reserves at that time. Leading it up to the pandemic, we were kind of closer in the neighborhood of $18 million. So considerable improvement in the dollars of reserves that we had.
And one of the reasons we did increase those reserves is because we had several expensive projects that we knew would require general fund dollars, and so we were saving money for those projects, which is an additional reason for reserves. So we have to have a Fire Station 3 in the northeast side of the city, and we did not own any land on which to build that fire station. So we did purchase a site on Union Road for that fire station. In addition, we know that some point in the future when we can get the necessary funds through grants or some other means, that we will need to build an interchange with Highway 46 East, and a parcel became available. It was clearly better to buy it at that point rather than wait until we absolutely needed it, given that we also needed it for the recycled water lines. So we had some major expenditures that came up, and so we were saving money for those, and that's one of the reasons reserves were at a higher level.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions. Back during the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, what were our staffing levels then?
Mr. Cornell? He's going to have to go back and check another budget document. Mr.
I'll give him a minute then. John, go ahead.
In what year were you referencing?
Before we went into the recession, we instituted a layoff protection plan which reduced staff size during the recession. What was our staff size prior to that?
I think silence means he's busily looking for those numbers, Mr. Mayor, if you want to go on and ask additional questions.
So here's one you probably know. What's our staff size now?
173.
So we have about 32,000 people in the city, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So if my public school math is correct, for all city services, police, fire, community services, street repairs, water, wastewater, the list goes on and on. We have less than 6 employees per 1,000 people to supply all of those services. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
There is differing levels of perception regarding our activities during the pandemic. Perhaps we have a department head there that could comment on some of the things that some of our departments have been doing during these unusual times. Perception that, well, nobody can get together, so we have no recreation services, or people aren't using the library. Can we get some report on that?
Yes, sir. In fact, I think every department head can tell you what they're doing, but based on your final 2 examples, I would ask Julie Dolan to give some wonderful examples of what recreation and library have been doing during the pandemic.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you both. So I can begin commenting, and then also we have our city librarian who is present this evening, as well as our recreation services manager. But I can say that there was a remarkable ability to pivot on behalf of both the library and recreation almost immediately upon the pandemic hitting our community. We have been very careful to stay within the protocols that have been set by the state and the county. But at every turn, if we were able to provide recreational opportunities outside rather than indoors, we did so. We incorporated a virtual presence almost immediately within the library and in recreation, offering story times, reference, all kinds of activities for the public. As soon as possible, our city librarian initiated a curbside program in which patrons could call in and request materials, which were then brought out to them in the parking lot with our staff, who was wearing gloves and masks to protect the public. We were one of the very first libraries in the area to initiate a grab and go program, and that enables the public to come into the library, do a quick browse, and pick up material so long as they're not staying longer than about 20 minutes to half an hour. We were able to have Wi-Fi that was accessible from the parking lot in the parking spaces on either side of the library. And we all know how very important that has been as students have had to access Wi-Fi to do their schooling. And some of our patrons do not have Wi-Fi access on their own. So these are just some of the strategies that were utilized by our staff to meet the needs of the public throughout the pandemic. And with that, Angelica Fortin, our city librarian, is there any more that you'd like to comment on this topic?
Only that we also applied for grants that allowed us to increase our digital footprint. So immediately following the pandemic, we were able to increase our digital holdings for people. In addition to that, we worked with the school district to provide library cards to virtually every high school student. So approximately 1,800 cards were issued so that high school students were able to access all of those digital resources to complete assignments. Our staff has been pivoting and has changed the method that they're providing service from the get-go. We've changed our service model at least 4, if not 5 times to make sure that we're providing absolutely everything that we can to our community.
Thank you, Angelica. And as I said, we also have Linda Plesha, our Recreation Services Manager. Linda, is there any other detail that you would like to provide?
Yes, thank you, Julie. I'd just like to make sure that council is aware of how much support our recreation staff provided for the Emergency Operations Center that opened in March in response to the pandemic situation. We provided the Happy Heart campaign and the mask campaign. As you mentioned, the Be Well Paso site and the virtual Paso site, providing all that additional virtual programming, as well as working with contracted instructors from the very beginning to offer additional virtual programming through our department. And then we've had over 44 classes at Centennial Park outside, and we've been reopening the fields in compliance with county and state guidelines, which are constantly changing. We created a compliance packet, and we have staff assigned to review and make sure that all the people using our facilities are in compliance. We accommodated the church briefly when they were allowed to come indoors. We have a church that reserves Centennial Park, and they're hoping to come back as soon as we're back in the red zone. And then we also assisted with the cooling center, the evacuation center, and the COVID testing sites that we've provided in the last few months. And staff and recreation staff that wasn't needed to support recreation services provided support for the library, community development department, maintenance services, and the IT department as well.
So, Mr. Mayor, if I could just piggyback on that, because Linda's being modest. In addition to all, well, both Linda and Angelica, as well as Julie, in addition to all of the changes the recreation did in order to continue its services virtually, Linda, for example, was also, her EOC role is in charge of all things in terms of support and shelter and welfare. So Linda organized and facilitated the testing that was taking place in our community facilitated meals being provided to people who couldn't, who had income cutoffs. Linda worked with a variety of people to identify seniors that needed assistance. So Linda is just one example of people who were doing two jobs, their existing job in an entirely different way, as well as a totally new job over and above that because of the pandemic. And Mr. Mayor, we have an answer for you in your staff level question, and I misspoke. The 173 positions are general fund. So in 2008, 2009, we had 6.13 FTEs per 1,000 residents, whereas now we have 5.37 FTEs, full-time equivalents, per 1,000 residents, despite providing much wider and higher level of service. So we have significantly reduced staffing levels, even though we've increased services since before the Great Recession.
Very good, thank you. And I had one other general question for the three ladies. It's impressive how the different organizations within the city have pivoted to react to the pandemic crisis and the delivery and method of delivery of their services. My question is, what has the public utilization been of these services since the pandemic started? Has the utilization dropped off, increased, stayed the same? How many people are depending on these services?
Well, thank you for asking, Mayor Martin. Certainly the virtual presence has risen greatly. Angelica, do you have any specific data that you can provide along those lines?
I will need a minute to pull that up.
Okay, thank you. And Linda?
And I will need a minute as well.
I keep asking these questions that take time. I'm sorry. While you're doing that, Tom, back to you. At the time of the recession, there was a thing in place that actually was put in place when I was on the council way back in the midst of time, and that is the Layoff Protection Plan, which was a series of actions the city would go through in times of emergency to maintain staff, maintain services, and mitigate the impacts of whatever emergency we encountered. We recently changed that layoff prevention plan to a different plan. Could you please refresh our memories about that plan and why we did it?
Be glad to, Mr. Mayor. So the original plan, which was developed in the 80s, was basically 10 steps that would be taken in sequential order, with the very first step being such things as the hiring freeze and voluntary hour reductions, voluntary position reductions, things like that. And then the last step being layoffs. And the reason for that was twofold. One, the early steps had the minimum impact on services, whereas when you got to the final steps, it has significant impact on services. And then the second reason was for fairness for our employees, because given how leanly staffed we are, and the fact that we pay less than our peers for most positions, the feeling was it would not be fair to balance the budget on the backs of our employees. The replacement to the layoff prevention plan still keeps with those original values and those original goals, but the organization has significantly changed. So we still want to do things in a sequential order, and do the less painful things both to our community and our staff first before the more painful things. But different departments are in different places. So what's the best thing to do in the city manager's office, for example, or in community development, is not necessarily the best thing to do based on those two criteria within emergency services department. Because, for example, if we reduce positions or furlough or keep vacancies in emergency services, as I said earlier, that violates our minimum staffing needs and would mean that a given engine or squad or other kind of vehicle could not be fully staffed without calling people back in on overtime, which ends up being more expensive. So the latest iteration that the council adopted is just recently is designed to ensure that we have the flexibility to use those sequential steps in the order and to the level that's best within each department, given the specifics of that department.
Okay, it looks like we have some information coming back from Linda.
Thank you, Mayor Martin. So I was able to pull up that we've had over 3,000 participants in our outdoor programs at Centennial Park alone since we reopened classes in June in compliance with the current county guidelines, which reduces our maximum attendance allowed. And so many of those classes have sold out and we've had wait lists. And then in the last 3 weeks, we've been allowed to reopen fields and we've opened them to 8 league programs already. That equates to a little over 1,000 participants, and we're adding leagues every week as we work with park maintenance staff to reopen facilities that have been closed since March. And since Tom suggested that perhaps I wasn't bragging enough, I'd like to just say that in the recreation division, we do all of that with less than 6 full-time staff equivalencies.
Thank you. So I don't want to prolong this unnecessarily. Do we have any other information about utilization coming?
I do have some numbers from the library.
Okay.
So this last month, we actually circulated 18,000 items with over 3,700 visits. We had approximately the same number of visits and checkouts last month as well. That was from a drop-off of about 0. As far as programs offered during the summer, we did provide a virtual summer reading program. As part of that program, we were able to distribute over 2,000 grab-and-go kits at the free meal sites in partnership with the school district. We were also providing virtual programming for our summer reading program. So we had 65 programs in July, 37 in August, and the attendance for those was 1,400 and 1,000 respectively. We also have people coming in to use the internet. So with our Wi-Fi program, which we launched the parking lot Wi-Fi in May, we had 343 people access the internet in May, and that has moved to 762 this last month in August.
Thank you. Julie, anything else?
No, sir. I think that covers it unless there are any additional questions. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. My final question, Tom, is for you. We've, through our discussions, and necessarily so because of the pandemic, the issue of the sales tax override ballot measure that's coming up has gotten entangled in the problems that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. But as I understand, going into this ballot measure discussion, we were talking about structural deficiencies we need to address as a community, pandemic or no pandemic. Am I correct in that?
Yes, sir.
So I just want to make sure that I understand, and the people listening in, that this is not solely pandemic driven. We do have needs above and beyond the pandemic, which are probably being intensified by the pandemic, but that's not the whole reason for all this.
Correct.
Okay, that's all I have. Councils have the opportunity to ask questions of staff. We are going to go to public comment once again. I want to remind you the number to call is 805-865-7276. And we would ask you to give us your name, and we will give you 3 minutes. Who is first up?
First caller is Cecilia Maislin.
Welcome.
Oh, surprised that I was first. Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the Paso Robles City Council. It was with great sadness that I learned of the proposal to close the city's Recreation Services Division and to reduce services at the library. And while I understand that safety needs to be a priority, I'm also cognizant of the effects of closing our recreational offerings. I moved here 23 years ago and raised 4 children here. We were very blessed to have a decent standard of living, and I hope to retire here, to remain here after I retire. One of the best attributes of this city is the sense of community. I moved here from the Midwest, and the love of place that I found here across not only the city but the region is absolutely remarkable in my view. My kids swam at both schools recreationally and on swim teams. They played basketball at Centennial Park, and we're fortunate enough to make friends at many different schools and become a part of the community through these activities. They have continued this level of participation as adults in the towns where they now live. I have many older friends who absolutely rely on the senior center for socialization and a continued sense of belonging and that sense that their lives are worth something. For many people and many families that are not as fortunate as mine, these cuts will be devastating. After-school programs, library services play an essential role in making sure that our most vulnerable and at-risk kids stay on track, especially during COVID. So many low-income families need these programs, whether it's a place to do homework, get Wi-Fi access, or again, playing bridge or other card games with friends at the senior center. I also want to remind you that our Raising a Reader program began at Georgia Brown and came out of an after-school program at what is now the Paso Robles Youth Arts Foundation site. So please do your best to maintain these services for those who are already behind, at risk, and underserved. Any dollar spent on our kids now will lead to exponential savings in the future, especially as we're seeing an increase, as was mentioned earlier, in property crimes and drug use. Caring for our kids now saves money later, as has been shown in study after study. Our kids' sense of belonging and pride are invaluable, and the sense of community that comes from concerts in the park and other community events help create a feeling of belonging and buy-in that will serve the city so well down the road. It seems to me that our future deserves your attention now. So please do your best to investigate other cost-cutting measures. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your call. We appreciate it. Who do we have next?
Next is Chris Toronto.
Welcome, Chris.
Hey, it's Chris Toronto, 549 Rose Lane, and I'm the chairman of the Rec Foundation. So hello, members of the City Council and City staff. You received a letter from Rec Foundation, which is included in the addendum this evening. Rec Foundation is a very active partner, of course, with the city, primarily through recreation services. Thank you for your individual responses back from the letter that we sent in. Rather than address the possibility of closing recreation services, which your responses were clear that it was not your, to quote, intention to eliminate rec and library programs, or as another response came through, only one council member has even suggested eliminating both recreation and giving library to the county to run as part of its system. But it's not a council decision at this time. You've made that very clear this evening as well. I understand it that the public response, as you've kind of mentioned, that comments made to the City Council has been loud and consistent. Recreation is an important part of this community, and while some members of the council may not see it as essential, I think the public outcry may help you understand that recreation is essential to this community, as you've already heard from one speaker, and you probably are going to hear some more. It is essential to our overall well-being, and as noted in our letter, contributes to the quality of life in Paso Robles. As one of your responses said, you are in favor of all of the departmental financial data in your hands before the election to make the proper decisions. That's what you've been saying this evening, too. I'm encouraged to hear the questions that you've been asking of city staff, actually, this evening, and it appears to me that the real hard work starts now in working with city staff to come up with real solutions as opposed to uninformed decisions and speculation. As another response stated, there is a lot of misinformation being sent out, and I think that's being cleared up now, or that you don't get all the information. As our city council, you are under the microscope as your decisions affect life in our city. So there are some long hours ahead of you to be able to make some informed decisions for 2021, and you have been elected to be up to the task. So we're looking to you to step up and be up to that task. And then one last comment provided was that you are trying to do your best to study all the options and to address the several revenue shortfalls due to the pandemic. I certainly hope so. But as we open up, because we will, please also consider the revenue forecasts and how they may offset that come in the future. So thank you for your time and appreciate it. Have a great night.
Thank you. And who's next?
Next caller is Jan Albin.
Welcome back, Jan.
Hi, good evening again, City Council. Thank you for this opportunity. There's a website I'm sure you're aware of called Nextdoor, and on that website there are no less than 3 posts regarding the saving the library and recreation services. So it's very clear by the comments on there that there are tons, if not thousands of people here who want those services saved, and I would agree with that. One of the suggestions made, however, in order to save some of these programs is that maybe you reduce some of the hours. Maybe the rec department is only open from, 10 to 4 or whatever that may be. So there are probably things that can happen in the rec department and in the library that can save those programs. One of the suggestions that was made was to have the organized sports like pickleball and tennis and baseball, football, take care of the courts or the fields with the players instead of having staff do that. Another suggestion that was made was that we figure out Plan B for the homeless encampment because as the cost really cannot be sustained. Another suggestion was to implement an intern program where we utilize high school students and college students to come in and get some experience in the city programs. My personal suggestion would be is to make sure that you do not allow the increase in the downtown parking program to take effect now. Their intention is to add 2 more parking ambassadors to increase the hours, etc. And so that could be a substantial increase that would take away from other really necessary programs. The number 1 suggestion on any of these websites was to make sure that across the board pay cuts were implemented for city employees. That if we're all going to take a hit, it's up to the city to do the same. I would thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Next.
Next is Melissa Johnson.
Hi, Melissa.
Hi, my name is Melissa Johnson. I'm the president for the California Park and Rec Society of District 8, which essentially runs San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties. And that probably makes it very apparent why I'm calling in tonight. I am a passionate supporter of all things recreation and, quite frankly, library services as well. And I would urge council to well, let's be honest, guys, nobody envies you right now. You're in a difficult position, and I thank you for taking seriously the role that you have to govern a fiscally sound community. And community is exactly what is going on with your recreation and library services. We promote community. The economic vitality of your city is promoted through the events and services that your recreation department provides. Recreation is early intervention specialists for the youth in your community. I've always said if you want to see a fire or a police department get awfully busy, you can cut a rec department because there are direct translations and correlations to that. You're looking at a long-term vision, and I definitely appreciate what you're staring down, but it seems we would be remiss not to mention some of the alternatives, looking at emergency reserves or adjustments, even if temporarily, to emergency reserves. No time like the present, we're in a global health pandemic here, in ways to save your rec department. And I think your community has spoken very loud. I think the California Park and Rec Society is certainly behind your recreation department. We just gave them a big award at the state level. What they accomplished is nothing short of incredible. Their ability to pivot in a moment of intense change is impressive, and they should be commended for that, as opposed to feeling as if they're fighting for their positions in rank and order. And while we believe, obviously, the importance of public safety and emergency services is highly important. There should be some consideration for the role your recreation and library services play in keeping them less busy and the partnership that they can create. That's what I have to say. Thank you very much. Best of luck to all of you. And I hope you come to an agreement soon for your community and the best thing that's in your community's interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Next caller is Angela Hollander.
Welcome, Angela.
Good evening, Mayor Martin and City Council. My name is Angela Hollander, and I live at 510 Larkfield Place in Paso Robles, California. I just want to begin at the top to just say that our country's hurting right now, our city's struggling, and we may have to sacrifice. In times of struggle, you have to look to our leaders to take the first cut. So my first suggestion is that I think everybody, I understand we have some collective bargaining people on our payroll, but I think if everyone could take some cut in pay, that could help a little bit, and that would include our city manager. Our family moved here in 2001, and for just a few short months later, the towers fell in New York City, just a few miles from where I was born. What I most appreciated about the city was the welcoming opportunities for us and our children. We could have not made the transition to California without the Parks and Recreation and Library Services. I had a high school student and a kindergartner, and they were involved in the aquatics. And you had just opened Barney Schwartz Park, and I attended that opening. Mayor Meacham had met us one time in a restaurant and just was so welcoming to our new family. My son was involved soccer and basketball at Centennial Park. The library summer program saved us. I raised 2 avid readers, and even though I have a library in my house, the library on downtown saved my life many, many a day. I was also very proud to have been involved in what an earlier caller referred to, the nationally acclaimed Raising a Reader program. And that was established in the Georgia Brown community through a partnership with the Parks and Recreation director at that time, Barbara Partridge. I went in and spoke to her as a representative of First 5 California to see where we could house this award-winning early literacy program. And at that time, there was a library study center and the Paso Robles Youth Arts Foundation, and the city could not have been more accommodating. I have to say that I know that in hard times we have to cut things, but if we're talking about drugs and problems and increase in crime, we're not going to reduce crime if we reduce our recreational services for our youth and for people of all ages, and certainly not our library. I think you've heard from staff this evening about how people are using the parking lot at the library to access Wi-Fi. Many of our families don't have broadband in their homes, and so please let's all work together so that we don't have to cut essential services. And my final comment is about the budget reserves. I understand that you don't want to drop below 30%, and Mr. Frucci mentioned earthquakes and fires. This is a global pandemic. I don't think it can get much worse than this, and nobody anticipated this, and it's affecting every single part. So maybe we just have to cut into those reserves just a little bit for a time being until we can get to the other side, which I think will be with a vaccine next summer. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Very good. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Who do we have next?
Next is Jane Carey.
Jane, welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Martin and City Council members. Thank you for taking my call tonight. You may remember me as an advocate, a longtime advocate for the library, a jewel in our city's crown. I have a question. You speak about the impacts on service quality and quantity that are needed to make in order to save the money you say we need to save. You've talked in general in terms about how you would do that. I'm wondering if you could please be more specific, particularly in reference to library and rec services, on what those cuts would actually look like. What would they mean? What do you intend to do in order to make your savings? I would appreciate your attention to that question at some time, and I thank you for the hard work you're doing to keep this city afloat. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. We will get an answer to your question. Who do we have next?
Next is Michael Miller.
Very good. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my call. I'm at 287 Cheyenne Drive, and I think you know I'm president of the library trustees. And since I did share a letter with you earlier this week, I'll try and keep my comments short. And what I wanted to point out was that the library's portion of the budget is only 3%. And yet I believe the contribution it makes to the community through all of its collections and services and programs is way beyond the amount of money that is invested. It's been funded at a low level for a long time. It's never gotten back to pre-recession levels, but that's true for all the areas. I know that. And if there are cuts coming, which I assume there will be, the library expects to be a good citizen and contribute to the solution. At 3% of the budget, though, I would be concerned if the cuts were disproportionately placed within that 3%, because to do so would be to create a scenario that damages the library beyond recognition for years and years to come. And I think a similar thing can be said for recreation services. Both of those are important to the quality of life in this community. That's one of your goals from the planning process, and we need to keep an eye on it during this pandemic time. And I will leave it at that. Thank you for all you are doing for us. Good night.
Thank you very much for your comments. If you are willing to make a comment tonight, you wish to make a comment, the phone number to call is 805-865-7276. Who else do we have in the queue?
Next caller is Mary Lou Gomez.
Welcome, Mary Lou.
Hello, good evening, City Council and Mayor. My name is Mary Lou Gomez, and I moved here almost 20 years ago with my husband and my 3 children. And I am the first generation college educated person in my family, and I wanted that for my children. I didn't have the resources available to me at home, so the library was my second home for my children. Now they've grown up, and I moved on and work with children of families that are young, 0 to 5, and I see what I saw in what my mom did to me, pushing them to go to school, helping them, and the resources that they have. They don't have them at home. The resources that they reach out to at the library, the study center, the resources that they have for the children so that their children don't move towards going towards gangs, joining gangs and or illegal activities at the recreational areas. Please consider that when you do your vote. Our children, our non-voters, need that, especially we have a lot of upcoming apartment complexes here that they don't have a front and backyard that they can go and visit. They have the parks, they have the recreation area, they have the library so that their brains can continue growing because they are our future. Think about them when you make your votes. It was so important to me. My children are now in higher education. They continue to strive for that, and that is a goal as a parent, as we Paso Robles, we all aspire for, that our children get a higher education and or better than what we can afford to give them. And without the resources of the library, without the resources of open air and recreational department, it's going to be very difficult. So please think about that when you decide to vote. I know that police department, it is essential. We have a fire department. Yes, it is essential. Our roads are essential, but so are a recreational department, so are our library. Those are essential things that we need as human beings, as Paso Robles. And this is a wonderful city. I love my city. I moved here and I want to die in this city. And I want to support it 100%. And I hope that you support it also. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Who else do we have?
That was the last caller.
Very good. Thank everyone for calling in and expressing their thoughts. It's a wonderful aspect of our community that we have these types of conversations, even during a pandemic, even when we can't sit face to face, we're able to have this type of conversation. I think it's really a great statement about our community. So I'm going to close public comment, bring it back to the council for discussion. I'm sure that we all have a great many thoughts on this, and we're going to talk about it exhaustively until we come to some meetings of mind here. So let's start off with Mr. Gregory.
So, Steve, before I make any comments, do we have to answer any questions?
Thank you very much for reminding me. I just thought of that, and I appreciate your bringing it to my attention. We do have some questions. There was a question about the potential of using a reduction of hours to address the budget considerations, particularly of recreation and library. Would either Angelica or Linda or Julie like to comment on the potential that we have to save any significant money by doing a partial reduction in hours?
Mayor Martin, this is Julie Dolan commenting. And yes, we have been working various scenarios that would include a potential reduction of hours. That would, of course, translate into some staffing reductions. That's, of course, how you save money when you reduce hours, is that you are letting go of staff or greatly reducing staff hours. But we certainly are looking at those kinds of strategies should it be necessary to make an alteration to this year's budget and beyond.
Thank you. There was also a question about using sports organizations to care for the fields to relieve city expenses. What's the status of that situation right now and the potential for changing in the future?
Yes, that question has come up on a few occasions recently, and as far back as the Great Recession, when we really had to reinvent ourselves as a recreation division, we absolutely utilized volunteers to the fullest extent. And certainly in the library, we've been utilizing volunteers ever since we opened the facility in 1995. We so respect the many, many volunteers in the Paso Robles Youth Sports Council. I believe you may have received a letter from its president, Mark Dart, and from every level of donating funds to refurbish fields and prep their own fields. We've received support in that way from the Youth Sports Council and from adult sports for that matter. The example of pickleball was presented by a caller. And in fact, that's how we started pickleball in Paso Robles, was a group of volunteers actually donated the funds to construct the pickleball courts at Centennial Park. That did not cost the city any money whatsoever. That did not come out of a recreation budget. And those hardworking folks in pickleball have been taking care of their own maintenance concerns on the courts. So it is a good idea. It's an idea that we have fully utilized ever since the Great Recession and even prior to that, but certainly very fully now.
So I remember back again in the midst of time, before we built that library, one of the central questions was how would we staff it? Because prior to that, our city library was the Carnegie Library in the park. And my memory of the discussion was that if we did not have substantial volunteer support, if we did not have people actually helping do the work of the library, and then again, if we did not have an organized library foundation to help support it, it would have been very unlikely we could have opened that place.
That's absolutely true, Mayor Martin. In fact, I was hired as a part-time library assistant when the new library opened. My first day was the first day that we opened that library to the public. And there were literally volunteers who had had more training than I had at that point. So I really had to step up my game. My understanding is that while we had the budget through a lot of donations and grants and so forth to build that facility, there was no increase in staffing budget. So we had to establish a full-blown volunteer program. And to this day, we utilize, when the library is fully open, anywhere from 80 to 100 volunteers. At one point, I looked into even what could we do to outsource library service. And I was told that we run the library so efficiently that that would not save the city a dime. So again, we have very fully utilized volunteers, and you're absolutely correct, Mayor Martin. We could not run the library without their assistance.
And I
Julie and Mayor, if I could just add, this is Angelica. Due to the nature of the pandemic, our wonderful volunteer program is actually not functioning at its full capacity. Many of our volunteers fall into the vulnerable population and have not returned since the start of the pandemic. So we are currently running with a much lower volunteer or much lower number of volunteers. Little over 20 volunteers have returned. So we are currently running primarily with the use of staff.
And how about the suggestion that we should enlist the assistance of high school and college students as interns in the recreation and library departments?
Well, again, we've fully utilized volunteers in both library and recreation. And in fact, we have utilized interns from Cal Poly. They've been assisting with Concerts in the Park, for example, and marketing efforts and so on. So all very good ideas, but all strategies that we have utilized. I do think it's really important to remind the public that, particularly to starting with recreation, our net cost to the city is $750,000 to run an entire recreation division. Compare that to our general fund budget for this year of $46 million. So when the public stops to think about all of the benefits of a recreation division, from field management to the senior center to a full aquatics program in which children are taught how to swim, $750,000 is a really good bang for the buck.
Thank you. I'm not sure who would address this, probably Mr. Frucci. If not, you can refer to the proper person. There was a question about the cost of the extending homeless support services in the future. I'm assuming referring to the encampment and beyond. You want to comment on that?
Mr. Mayor, I believe Ms. Dolan would be the best one to answer that question.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry, Mayor Martin, could you please repeat that question?
Yes, one of the callers made mention of the fact that there were expenses associated with serving the homeless, the encampment, other services, and looking into the future, what those costs would be and how we intend to address them.
Well, we certainly recognize that we do need to address homeless services in our community. But I, again, want to remind everyone that we had planned to construct and operate a full-blown homeless services center, and we gave that project up, saving the city about $2.6 million. Some of that would have been covered through HEAP grant funds, but the significant portion of those expenses would have been city expenses. The plan had been to outsource operations of that homeless services center through a cooperative effort from ECHO. And the plan was to pay ECHO $300,000 a year to support operations of that center. All of that is off the table at this point. We are relying quite heavily once again on Paso Cares and ECHO to assist us, and the city will do whatever it can within its power to work out an alternative plan. At this time, we do not have a budget line for homeless services. We have had to, because by virtue of the fact that there's an emergency in the riverbed and the fire danger, come up with a plan that has resulted in the Borky encampment. But moving forward, we do not have a budget line item for that yet, and that will need to be established.
Thank you. I think, Mr. Frucci, there was a concern expressed by the potential expansion of the parking situation downtown. What's the status on that?
So the Parking Commission has been looking at what are the appropriate next steps for the parking program, when the time is right to do it, both from a city's fiscal perspective, as well as based on the various seasons of visitor services. we have no plans to bring that back to council immediately. So even though that may be the proposal from the parking committee, as the caller noted, given everything else that's going on, that's not something we will be bringing to council immediately.
Thank you. There was another comment about the need for across-the-board pay cuts. You might want to comment again on how this isn't private enterprise and it works different in the public sector. People may not want to hear that, but it is the truth. How does that happen? How would you, for instance, cut everybody's pay by 10%? How does that work?
So under the various laws of the state of California, including Myers-Milius-Brown, which governs our practices with respect to both our represented and unrepresented employees, the city cannot unilaterally impose compensation reductions on represented personnel. The city council could, it's only the city council has this authority. The city council could reduce the number of positions in the city, which would result in layoffs. But in terms of any decisions that would impact the working conditions, the compensation, or other matters relating to existing positions, that can happen only after meet and confer sessions with the agents of represented employees. And so there are restrictions as to how that process needs to take place and what actions the city might be able to enact if we in the represented groups were not able to come to agreement. So it is not a straightforward process. And for example, if it were the council's desire to implement an across-the-board pay reduction equivalent through all positions, that might not be possible because it would depend upon the results of meet and confer sessions with the employee groups. And some may have different approaches and different ideas and different willingness to come to terms and come to agreement with the city. We do have contracts with our existing employee groups, and those contracts do have reopener clauses in them, but those reopener clauses are very specific, and a pay reduction may not even be one of the options for the reopener.
So not to oversimplify, but the city council would have the authority to release employees, but not the authority to summarily decrease employees' pay.
Correct.
In fact, not observing meet and confer rules and contractual obligations of the city with its labor groups could be illegal.
Could be illegal, yes, sir. And if the city did take any inappropriate action, there is a board of the state of California called PERB, the something Employees Relations Board. I can't remember what the P stands for. Public Employees Relations Board. Thank you, Kimberly. That the employee groups could take their complaints to, and we would be honor bound to implement any decision of that board.
Okay, then the last, excuse me, the last question I have written down here is a request for specifics of savings associated with whichever plan or mutation of the plan that we settle on tonight. I'm assuming you can't tell us that until we give you direction on which plan to pursue, but you tell me.
That's correct, but we do have a chart that shows one possible approach that Councilmember Gregory asked for that we can put up on the screen if you'd like.
Let's take a look at that.
It'll take us a second to.
We will be patient.
Okay, so this is just one possible approach. The most important line is the bottom line, the 3.3 million, and that's the target of the Plan B. And so the council directed us to minimize the reductions in the high priority services as indicated by the polls. And so that's the police, emergency services, and streets functions. The council also directed us to look initially at the library and recreation programs, and that's why you've received so many emails from supporters of those two programs. So this is just one way of achieving the $3.3 million total. And that would be the primary reductions would come in the recreation program, the library program, and the city manager's office. Between the two of them, they would achieve approximately almost 30% of the reductions citywide, and recognize this is only general fund. So, for example, the police department would get a 4% reduction based on the discussions that have already taken place with department heads as to how this could be accomplished. And that may be way more than the council wants to accomplish. It would not be any line police officers, for example, but it's certainly support functions. The community development department would also achieve a 4% reduction. And it needs to be noted that the community development department, like recreation, but even to an even greater extent, does charge fees to recoup costs. The administrative services department, in terms of its general fund activities, would have a 3% reduction. Public works, the general fund portion only, a 3% reduction. And then emergency services, a 2% reduction, which would not involve any decrease in positions because of our minimal staffing requirements. Then with fewer personnel, there would also be an accompanying reduction in operating costs projected at about $300,000. So that's just one way to do this. That is an attempt to adhere to council direction that was given to us on September 1st. If the council chooses to give us different direction tonight, we would come back to you with a different approach. And as I indicated, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, just one more thought, if you don't mind. As I indicated, Plan B, which is $3.3 million constitutes, which is a full year reduction, would not necessarily be implemented until July 1. So it gives plenty of time through the budget process to either refine these numbers, totally throw them away and start over again, whatever is the council's desire.
Thank you for that. Okay, let's go to council comments. Mr. Gregory.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank our community for a very profound and wonderful response to this effort. I've lived here for a little over 40 years, and I love this town. There's nothing in the rec department or library I haven't been to or done. And our intent is to share this very difficult task with our entire community. And I'm sorry it came across as the way it did in the last meeting, but we have a serious problem. We don't have enough money to continue to run our city the way that we've been spoiled for so long to enjoy. And so we have to come together with our different departments. We have to come up with different ways to save money. And the things that are near and dear to public comment and to our council is to preserve our fire and police department for safety for our public. We must provide water and sewer. And we don't have a lot of choices, so our choices are difficult. And we need our community to work and help us with these choices. And this process is what this is all about. Councilman Hammond has a really good idea. And I like what he's thinking, and that is that we should, we need more detail, more information about where our economy is going and how we're doing as a council and as a city and with our budget. But our budget is the bottom line. There's going to be cuts somewhere, somehow, and we have to do it with the kindest and most effortless way we can. But there's going to be cuts. So this is the best way to do it with the community, to reach out to our department heads, especially in recreation and the library, to try a way to figure this out. Paso Robles is a can-do-it community. We've always been able to come through. And with a little luck, we could get more money in our budget by promoting our community and having the money come back to our community from our recent losses. But in the meantime, it's our responsibility and our livelihood to make sure our city survives and thrives in a healthy and safe way for our citizens. So with that, I would be okay with a suggestion from Councilman Hammond to come back after Ryan's report on our recent quarters of activity. But there's one item on the list, if you could please put that back up. I will not support any reduction in the police department at all. Our police department is understaffed and we need all the help we can get. And I'm also going to be against any reduction in our fire services. Those two departments are incredibly wonderful. They're understaffed, they're overworked, they're fighting fires. They don't have enough officers to cover all the shifts and have done nothing but give to our community, as you've seen in the last 3 to 5 months. So we need to protect those. The numbers on this document right in front of us for the $3,323,000 cuts are numbers. But they're numbers that our community needs to deal with, and we need to work together on it. We can no longer keep our head in the sand. We need to work on our budget, and we're going to need everybody's help. And our council is doing the proper and right thing by discussing it and reaching out to the community and receiving an outpouring of great respect and love from our community. And you're all right, this is a great place. I love Paso Robles myself. But we need to come up with some money. We need to find money to survive and to protect what we have in Paso Robles. That's my comment.
Thank you. Councilman Hammond?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, I will start off with the fact, again, that accurate data is critical to our decision-making at this point. October, our meetings in October, where we first see then our revenues coming back from the state and TOT, everything about accurate information with which to make a path forward is critical at this point. We've guessed and kind of planned where it's going to be, but at this point, if we're going to be making hard decisions about cuts of any kind, we need to be accurate. And so that's going to be the first step. I believe, again, and when we get into the turn of the year, January, February, when we begin our budget talks with regard to our next fiscal year, 21 and 22, that we need to maybe consider, if things are stable again and hasn't changed from where we are now, that we might want to look at our reserves. Again, remember I asked to have, and we did, a 30% plan to keep that much into the reserves. But we also said we have a 10% pillow, if I call it a pillow, that we can also get into to help us through this. I personally think, and again, our trade, what we're doing, we are extremely busy. I feel, I don't know about others in the council, but it feels like a rubber band out there that is ready to go. I have great hopes in the election coming up, in the national election, that once that gets completed, things are going to change a lot and people are going to get more excited. Things are going to start happening. I think our revenues obviously will start showing an increase immediately. But if it does not, again, we need to plan. And that's what I'm saying here, that come the first of the year, we need to have a tool bag ready to go. And that's why I voted this last meeting to get staff engaged in getting those tools in our bag, where we can make cuts, where it might not be preferable to do. I personally, just to put it out there, I'm not supporting any elimination of rec or library or senior programs at all. Community services is a huge department that many people utilize. I was very impressed about The comments we found that, again, in my opinion, with the COVID, maybe not a whole lot of things were happening, but it's absolutely backwards. A lot is going on through our staff and what's happening with the public out there. And I'm happy for that because they needed something. I mean, everybody gets cooped up here to the point where, you start having other issues just from that. So I would direct staff to basically continue with our plan A. And when it comes around to budget talks, we're going to, start looking at actual data. By that point, we'll have a second quarter under our belt. I also want staff to engage volunteer support. I think, again, our Roblins know that we're in a hurt and they're ready to help. They've always been that way. So with regard to, the rec and library departments or anywhere that the public can help our staff, if we get to the point where we have to reduce staff hours of operation, that's going to be the area that they can help physically do things and keep things rolling during that lull. I mean, I expect that another year from now, we won't be here at all. But on the other hand, putting, there was a comment made by Mr. Frucci, we're balancing the deficit on the backs of our employees. And to some point, I think, all families, all companies have to do that when times are lean. And I'm not afraid of doing that. I'm impressed by our brother firefighters that they were throwing out the fact they wouldn't mind a temporary reduction in pay to help. But that's them speaking, and that's not all the unions. So something like that where maybe our employees understand that we'd rather keep everybody we have, but yet take a little less pay somehow. That's important to explore and get on paper that we can count on that if we have to. Another tool in our bag. Another thing, looking at minimum staffing. In other words, our policies with regard to how we staff should be explored. Again, lean engineering, if you might call it that, where we still get the program out there for people to use, but yet maybe not quite as labor intensive. So lean staffing might be a policy we want to look at, Tom, and how that reduces with regard to the services. Clearly, all we do, every employee that we have in the city produces services for our Roblins. I mean, that's what they're there for. So anytime we have a reduction in employee time, it's somehow going to be reduced in services. So to what point our Roblins are going to accept that? I think, again, everybody's ready to tighten their belt for the next 6 to 12 months if we have to. But I'm betting, I'm hoping anyway, that we won't have to go that far. So hopefully that's a few ideas from Hammond. That's enough. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Strong.
Yes, thank you. And maybe I've been here too long and been too involved too long, but I've got a little bit different take on a lot of this. I have this unusual practice that some of you know about where I give at least one small gift to every employee every Christmas. And so I remember in 2007, I gave about 250 gifts to our employees. Now that figure is probably pretty close to what we had, which means that we are down more than 70 employees from our peak over 10 years ago. And our employees, just to make sure everybody understands, our employees have been taking relative cuts almost every year for the last 10 years by either freezing their pay for another year or taking less than the inflation rate in increases so that their expenses have gone up more rapidly than their wages. I don't think wage cuts or things like that are a way to go. And I know legally we can't cut their wages. But if they want to voluntarily take some decreases one way or another, that's their business. But we have an unusual situation in Paso Robles that a lot of people don't realize. We provide more services for our citizens than any other city in this county, and any other city in many of the regions of this state. We are a full service city. We have the only city library in this entire county. We are one of maybe 2 or 3 at the most cities that even provide water and sewer to their citizens. Most of the cities subscribe it or have a private company that provides it, and the people pay separately for that. So when people are worried about what they're paying, please remember that what you're getting for what you're paying. We have an airport. We are the only city with an airport in this entire region. We are one of the very few cities that has even a transportation center, a train station. We have so many things. We're the only one with a landfill. Many services that we provide, and some of those have nothing to do with the general fund. But even within the general fund, we provide services that many other cities don't provide at all. And yet our employees are getting wages that are about average or below average for most of the region. And this is a competitive thing like every other area. So when we talk about what our costs are for our employees, they're not outrageous at all. And our employees can go anywhere they want to work. And we have to be very careful just how far and where we make cuts. Or, as we have had happen before and could happen again, they just go somewhere else to work. Now, the one advantage we have is we have a fantastic place to live. And I grew up in a community very much like this one. In fact, when I grew up in it, it was a very low-income community, but it had these kind of services. And as a result, it is now the wealthiest community in that state because so many people wanted to live there and because of what it offered. We can't afford to let those services become less than what they are. We need to be the kind of high-quality community that we already are. And all of these cuts that we're proposing in Plan B or Plan A come to a total of about $3.3 million. We went into the situation with the earthquake in 2003 with about a 20% reserve or a little less for the city, and we weathered it. We got through it with no problem. If we went from 30% to 20%, not on a permanent basis, but at least to get us through this, and I look at a pandemic as just as much of a natural disaster as an earthquake or any other thing, that's $3.5 million. We can totally cover that same amount of money just by out of reserves. That doesn't mean it's a permanent cut and we're going to lose that money. We build it back up by keeping what we have now, to keep attracting people and to keep growing in our businesses and people wanting to live here and wanting to come here, because that's how we have always paid for our things. And that's how this city was founded. It was founded to provide wonderful things for people to come and visit and use. And we still do that. We should keep doing it. So I can't see any of the cuts that were talked about on recreation or in the library, definitely. And I've been involved in that for many years too. But I could go on, and I'm talking too much, so I don't want to keep talking forever. This is something to get through. It's something to address, and it has to be addressed seriously. But we need the facts, as John has said, as Councilman Hammond has said. We definitely have to have better information. And I, too, think that from everyone I'm talking to in the community, the hotels are doing well. They're having a lot of people in them. Our sales are up at Target approximately 20% this year over last year. Automobile sales, theoretically, according to the auto dealers, are very high right now. That's all good sales tax money. And by the way, most of our sales taxes are paid by people who are not residents of this community because we are a regional center. And that means We know that 40% comes from zip codes that are other than ours. But even from within our zip code, more than 50% of the people live outside of the city limits that are coming here and buying those items. So that's a wonderful way to pay for it, which is not what I'm talking about now. That's a fact. Those are facts. I'm not urging people to do anything, because we ultimately are going to have to deal with whatever our voters decide. Whatever they're willing to pay for, that's what we're going to have to give them. If they want high services and quality and quality city, then it's going to cost money, just like everything else do. When I go to the store and buy groceries, they don't let me walk out the door without paying for them. Nor is anything else that we get in life free that's worth anything. And nor are our city services. So whatever our citizens want in services, that's what we're going to give them, because that's all the money we will have to pay for. And we're going to be a responsible city council. But I would like to see option 2 adopted, but with a slight modification. I would like to see it come back and direct the city manager to bring it back in order for us for further consideration in the beginning of next year. I don't want to see anything implemented right now. This budget is already covered thoroughly, and we can cover any other unexpected things with the reserves we have right now. And we can also probably cover this whole thing next year, depending upon what the actual facts are. We may have more income coming in than we know. And if the citizens decide to give us that sales tax increase, that isn't for these services anyway. That's so that our police department, which is only at 50% of the recommended amount of police officers per 1,000 for a community of our size, gets up there closer to what they ought to be. That's so the fire department gets closer to where they ought to be. And that doesn't mean huge increases in salary, but it definitely does not mean any cuts in salary. And it does mean we have to stay competitive so that we can attract the people we need in order to fill those spots. But if that money comes in, we've kept our promise on the sales tax. And I'm sure that with all the controls that we're putting in there, the citizens can be confident that we will keep our promises in the future. So I'm for Plan B, but with that modification to bring it back for further consideration in January. Meanwhile, I do want to get more on the budget in October, as we have already mentioned we're planning to do. So I think that's pretty much what I want to say. Thank you.
Councilwoman Garcia.
Yes, sir. Thank you. You know, I don't know how many of our listeners or residents know too much about me and my background, but this has hit really hard for all of us as Paso Roblens. But I have worked for Walmart Pharmacy for 25 years. And when the pandemic started, you know, our pharmacy got cut back. Our hours used to be from 9 to 9, and they went from 9 to 7. Our eye center, optical center got closed. And in order to keep the people working, the staff at the optical center, they asked them if they wanted to come and help the pharmacy, and they did, so that they could keep their positions with the company. So things like that are ideas that I know that we can implement with our city as well. That's exactly what the rec center and the library have done, is helped each other so that staff can stay on. And those are things that I've seen myself go personally being affected by, and I know that our community is also being affected by this pandemic crisis. When our company, when Walmart asked us to cut back our hours, like I said, I've been with the company for 25 years, and so I was the first one that did a voluntary cut, and I took 3 days off because I had so many hours. I have not used up any of my sick hours or any of my personal hours, because I never call it sick, and I never go on vacations very much. So I had a lot of hours that I could turn in, and so that the rest of the staff could stay on, I was willing to do that. I also work for Sculptero Winery on Saturdays, and in March, when the pandemic hit, I called the tasting room manager and I told him, you know, please, if the staff needs to, if they really need this job, their job, and that's their primary job, please don't hesitate to cut me and my hours. So with me personally, have done that in my personal life. I know that other Roblins and other things can happen and we can think outside the box. I personally do not want to see any staff cuts, but I know that we as City Council, we have to have a plan, you know, on how we're going to deal with our budget. That is what we're here for. You know, we will need to make sure that all the services and that we take care of everybody. I have been reading all the emails. I have been personally on several phone calls. I had 2 lunch meetings today. And I listened to everybody, and they might not know what personal cuts I've had to deal with in my personal life. So I understand how hard it's going to be for all of us. But the worst thing we can do right now is not unite. I see a lot of social media back and forth and a lot of negativity. And I think the main thing is, you know, we're going to come up with a plan and we're going to get these reports in and see how we're doing. I agree with Mr. Hammond that things are picking up. I see it at the winery. You know, it's getting busier and busier. I see it at my work. You know, now the optical is back open. At the pharmacy, we're doing a lot more curbside. We're doing mail order. We, you know, mail out prescriptions for free to residents that, you know, don't feel comfortable coming in. So I just feel the biggest thing we also need to focus, not just coming up with a plan and a budget. And I know that numbers are important, but I think also that we need to be a little sympathetic to everybody's needs as a whole community. And we need to unite and not be so negative on each other. If everybody could maybe send in ideas instead of negative suggestions, I think that would be better. So I agree on waiting to see what the actual numbers are for October. We did back in June do a 7.4 million cut. So I know we can do it. If, you know, if Ryan says we have to cut 3.3 more, then I know we can figure it out. And I know that we are a Paso strong and we can do this. But I just don't think that it should be done with any negativity. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I want to start off my comments by thanking the many, many people who have written me over the last week. I know you've also written to the other council people, and I trust you've received responses from all of us. Again, I think it's a strong indicator of the strength of our community that we do engage at that level. And I'm just so pleased, again, the people of Paso Robles have acted this way. I also want to thank the department heads that I've met with the last week, because I took the time to go to those folks and say, look, we're facing very important decisions here. Tell me what I don't know. Explain to me what I haven't understood in the past. And to my shame, there were things that I didn't know about the activities that have been going on during the pandemic, the sacrifices that have been made by our employees, and the dedication they've made to our community. So I thank them also for that. As I look at the challenges ahead of us right now, one thing that I want to say to everyone listening right now, and whoever will write to me in the future, is none of us sitting here tonight want to protect the fat in the city. We realize that we're in a pandemic. We realize that we have some structural deficiencies, and the option of protecting the fat is not there. And I tell you honestly, and I tell you based on the studies that I've done in the city and the information that I've gleaned from individuals, that we are past the fat, folks. We are now into the muscle and quickly approaching the bone. And if we slash and burn our community right now by cutting too deeply, the Paso Robles that emerges on the other end will not be the Paso Robles that we've all come to love. It will not generate that love of place that was referenced earlier tonight. You know, the challenges that we have endured over the last year, active shooters, we called upon our heroes to protect us, and they did. Fires in the riverbed, we called upon our heroes, and they did. All the services that some of us don't see, some of us don't partake of, but many of us do, we called upon our heroes to make it work during a pandemic, and they did. And what we need to do as a city right now is we need to look at ourselves and say, you know what? We all need to be heroes right now. We are each other's heroes. And as Councilwoman Garcia said, if we stand together, we will not fall over. And so with that in mind, I want to move past what was the initial shock of the pandemic on the city's finances and the city's psyche. Rightfully so, the council looked at the worst case scenario and said, if this continues, this is what the future will look like. And we have to have a plan to address that. And we do. But we are far into this pandemic now. And as you've heard anecdotally tonight, we sense the economy is coming back, and we sense that it's going to come back even more strongly. So I think that we have to have some confidence in ourselves. We have to say, you know what? As Paso Robles always has been, we are unafraid to face the future. We believe that good things are going to happen if we stick together and make them happen. And if we too far reduce our ability to harness that optimism, then 3 years out from now, the cuts that we are looking at right now are going to seem puny by comparison. So I think our formula for moving ahead includes the following. We need to be ready as a council to commit even more reserves to protect the services that have defined Paso Robles in the past. There's a point of no return. There's a point where we can't go past, but we haven't reached that point yet. And we need to make sure that we are securing the services for our community that they want to the greatest extent and to the greatest length possible. We need to depend on the recovery. We need to believe that our businesses are going to remain strong because they are strong businesses and because we as a city have been working to make them stronger. We've been helping restaurants operate in the streets. We've been working with our chamber, with our wine alliance, with our Travel Paso people to get COVID information out, to spread the news of the businesses that are open and safe. We need to support those businesses because to support those businesses, support ourselves. We need to continue to petition the state to tell the story of San Luis Obispo County, that we have a low infection rate, that we have a high recovery rate, and that we are ready to move ahead open and safe with our businesses. We need the flexibility to do that, not just in the face of the pandemic, but in the face of the challenges that have been posed by the wildfires and the smoke and the things that have really stymied us in our efforts to increase business. We want to increase the funds that are available, the grants that we announced tonight for our businesses. We want to look further into those and make sure that to the greatest extent possible, we can keep our businesses operating and strong. So when this pandemic passes, we are ready to acquire more market share. We are ready to grow. We are ready to prosper. We are ready to be the Paso Robles that we've always been in the past. And finally, we need to be ready to re-examine and adjust. We need to collect the information that we need, get the latest and the greatest information, and make the best prognostications and changes that we can based on that information. So based on that, I think that I would also support maintaining services at their current level, if need be, to commit further reserves to make that happen and to redouble our efforts to accelerate the recovery in the city of Paso Robles so that any further losses down the line are minimized, and hope that the day never comes when we have to visit those cuts that will indeed take out the muscle and bone of our community. And those are my comments. I would entertain a motion.
Steve, I'll take a shot at a motion. I can take it as option 2 with some modifications. So I like the Councilman Hammond's idea to get more information to us before we make any decisions, so that we can hear what the reality is in our economy. I think that I would like to make as part of that motion, I'd like to remove any reduction in the police department or fire department funding, and encourage the departments that are affected to come back to the city manager with ideas of potential reduction ideas for the future while we're looking at all the documentation, the actual data of our economy. Kind of weird motion, but that's it.
So as I understand your motion, no reduction in police or fire. Send this back to staff for reduction ideas with, did I understand you correctly with the most recent information? I didn't hear the last of the.
Yeah, on the list that the city manager provided us, to have those departments come back with the reduction ideas and follow Councilman Hammond's idea to get the most accurate information we can have available to us so we can make decisions as we move along.
He wants to cut departments now.
No?
Okay, wait a minute. We've got a motion. Is there a second?
So Hammond will second for discussion, Mr. Mayor.
Motion by Councilman Gregory, second by Councilman Hammond. Mr. Hammond.
Again, I want to make it clear, understand at least from staff, that the plan we currently have in place and is moving forward will take us through to the end of July or the end of June of 2021. Is that correct? Without any further reductions in staff, Tom?
Based on, well, it isn't exactly a yes or no answer, and I'm sorry. We are in the midst of requesting staff to apply for the voluntary enhanced retirement and reduction programs. So a certain level of that was included in the budget. So we will be reducing staff over the next few months as part of the budget that the council already approved. My answer still stands. We haven't reduced any positions yet because this process is still underway, but within 60 days, we will have reduced positions based on what the council already approved. But over and above that, we can, under the current assumptions, go to the end of the year without any changes in the budget. Yes, sir.
Okay. I think then, again, the motion that Councilman Gregory has made is fine at this point. I don't really support cutting people right now at this point. Again, we have other tools in the bag that can be done before we get to that point. But for the sake of discussion and moving things forward, I think, again, if we plan, this continued budget and service prioritization that you already have set up in Plan A, I think at this point I am comfortable voting for that. Plan B is where we get into first part of next year when we see that things maybe not be going as well as we want, that we're going to have to start making real decisive plans for the budget for starting July 1 of 2021. And that's where I'm saying we need to get all the tools in the bag. In other words, and I'm going to go here right now just to throw it out on the table because we need to start talking about it. And I didn't say it earlier, but our half-cent money that we've been getting, we promised the public that we would spend every bit of that plus more on our streets, which we have been doing for 8 to 9 years. However, in time of need, we do have the authority to use that for other things. And that might be another source of revenue that we can tap and pay back or, get us through this situation. I think we need to get that on the table for discussion. Another thing too is the property tax. We've gone there. Mayor Martin has worked hard with the county and the other mayors, but it hasn't gone anywhere. We need at this point in time to go after this sit down and get some sort of a discussion going with everybody in the county with regard to the 14% of property tax that we receive is just not enough to keep cities going these days. I'm sure the other cities that are also having their property tax, or excuse me, their sales tax measures on the ballot this coming up is going to have the same situation if it doesn't pass. So now's the time to reopen that, Steve, Martin. I think it's important. We need to get more revenue to operate this city, bottom line, so we don't have to keep asking our people to increase our revenue to do it. So those are a couple other things I'd just like to get out on the table, but those are tools, again, that I think we can revisit first part of the year. So, Tom, do you have enough direction from this motion with regard to, or do you need more specific information?
So as I heard the motion, we would not look to implement any additional actions over and above the things that the council already directed us to do before October 20th at the earliest, when we have at least the first quarter results of both revenues and expenditures, and that there would be not a single dollar of reductions in either police or emergency services, which by definition means the reductions in other departments would have to be greater, and that we would encourage the other department heads to come to the city manager based on a rethinking of how to achieve the needed reductions. That was the motion that I heard made and seconded.
Okay. Further discussion?
Yeah, Tom, that is correct, Tom. So that means the departments that were mentioned, they get together and come back to you for ways to get through this.
Yes, sir.
So those numbers that you have published go away and they come back to you.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so I have, Fred, you have a comment?
Mr. Mayor, further discussion.
Yes, please. I've got some too. Go ahead.
All right. I thought we were going to go down our line, our normal line, because that was a second for discussion, and I was willing to accept the section for discussion. But I cannot support this because I cannot support any more cuts right now. We are, as you said, down up to the bone. We don't have enough staff left to give our people the services they already have. And they want more coming back to them. We can't even provide those. And I agree with what Councilman Hammond said, that we have to put the pressure more somehow. We have to find ways to get the Board of Supervisors to give us at least as much money as the other cities in the state are getting, other than the cities in this county. Why does this particular county need more money, more of the property tax money than the other counties do? Is their operations that poor? Something's wrong here. We should get at least the state average, which is 24%, not 17%. And that would mean we didn't need to make any cuts. I don't want to see us make any cuts right now until we know just how much money we actually have coming in, because we don't know. And even proceeding with this plan, if we have some people already who said, okay, I'll take this cut, I'll do this, as long as it doesn't reduce services, that's fine. But if this means a further reduction in our service level and giving our people even less than what they now get, I can't support this motion. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Councilman Garcia, any comments?
I just want to hear the whole, everything. I just want to rehear it, please.
Okay, we'll get it restated before we take a vote. I have some questions. Mr. Furci, I want to make sure I understand this. At September the 1st, we gave staff direction to go back and try to find additional savings of $2.5 million in the general fund expenditures. If that request had not been made and we just said we're moving forward with the plan that was in place at that time, we would, correct me if I'm wrong, we would be cutting $7 million out of the annual budget, backfilling with $5.5–6 million to make ends meet. And we would not be proactively going out and letting people go from their positions. Is that right?
Correct.
Thank you. So, looking at next year, 2021, if I understood the staff report correctly, if numbers don't change, if the revenues that have been projected are accurate, if the expenses are accurate, we still fall $3.3 million short. Is that correct?
All those assumptions that you stated, plus in addition, if Measure J20 does not pass. Yes, sir.
Thank you. So I just want to be clear on that. So the other comment I wanted to make was on the road tax. I know this has crossed everybody's mind, and we made a pinky promise with the community. We were going to spend that sales tax override on streets. Streets is one of the top 3 priorities in the last 3 community surveys. I would not be willing to go along with any plan to repurpose those funds without at least, at a minimum, going to our Citizens Oversight Committee and asking them for their input, because they're the ones that have to say to our community whether or not we're using those funds appropriately or not. I believe right now that what we need to do is we need to go back to September 1st and say, you know what, we asked you for the option, $1.5 to $2.5 million. The impact of saving that money is too great for this community. We want to go forward to the end of the year, re-examine our revenues and expenses on January 1, looking to the next budget cycle, and if necessary, commit to spending down to our 20% reserve level to preserve those staffing levels. That's my position. Any other discussion?
So just for clarification on the motion.
Yes.
That's basically the motion, so Maria understands. That we're asking the manager or city manager to go back to the city departments that are mentioned with no reduction to police or fire, to come back to the city manager for potential reductions in the future, and we can revisit it on the 1st of January or the beginning of the year, if you want to put that date.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Gregory?
Aye.
Councilmember Hammond?
Aye.
Councilmember Garcia?
Aye.
Councilmember Strong?
No.
Mayor Martin?
No. Measure passes 3-2. Mr. Frucci, any follow-up comments before we move on?
No, sir.
Item number 16, current council committee activities and reports. Mr. Gregory.
So we had a meeting with Supervisor Vachon and Fred and for John. We discussed the tax length, and he feels it's going to be very difficult to get anywhere on that. But I will hand it to our city manager and Warren Freight that we are getting our fair share, a better fair share out of all of our new projects and all of this last year and years to come. But to get that to happen at the county level is going to be an extreme fight, and Mayor Martin's going to need all the help he can get to get the county to come off their high speed. How many dollars? So, and that's all I have to report. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Hammond?
We had a meeting with the Seniors Advisory Committee the other day. Nothing major to report. They were obviously very concerned about the Community Services Department. Police, fire, of course, was on their mind, but more, again, the rec and library, and, of course, their own Seniors Department. And, again, I assured them that services will continue. To what extent, though? Everybody, again, has to understand that through time of lean revenue, that services are going to be lean as well. So I think they got that. They understood that we have to make some really, really hard decisions, and they're supportive. They think that generation understands. They've been through it, the Great Depression. They understand that things like this will happen, and we have to make hard decisions, but it will come out on the other end. So other than that, that's all I have, Mr. Mayor, other than I had a couple items here just from my own. As far as Berkey Flat expenses, I'd like to maybe agendize a report on that this next meeting if we can, if the rest of councils want to engage this. Again, we're spending $19,000 a month, and it's supposed to go to November. But I'd like to kind of get everybody back up to speed on exactly what we're doing there and why we're doing it there. And again, in my envision, when we did that location, I personally did not expect such a high expense to do it monthly. So I'd like to have, in my own edification, a report from staff. Maybe Julie can get this together and maybe get some further direction on it if we need to.
I have no problem with that. Anybody have a problem with that?
No, sir.
Hearing no one?
No,
Okay,
no,
John.
no problem here.
What else you got, John?
That's it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Mr. Strong.
Yes, thank you. And I did send you all this in an email, so I hope you got it. This was a busy time, especially the last week, with 4 to 6 hours a day spent just trying to answer misinformed residents' emails. That is all the time I could manage and still get anything else done. I probably wound up answering less than half of them, although I did answer over 150 of them. There's a lot of interest in getting more accurate information about the budget and the sales tax proposition. I've received a suggestion for a town hall meeting in the city park during the first or second week of October, and I endorse that suggestion. I'm asking for the council to agree and direct staff to set one up for information only, no debating, in that time frame with appropriate health precautions. Staff and council could be spaced in the gazebo with the citizens on the lawn and a public address system for us and questions from the audience. So far, there has been no extensive media coverage due to the national elections. Please support this. Since we last met, I've attended 4 meetings representing the city and 1 swearing in of a new police officer. Next week, I'm participating in the board of directors meeting for a management agency of the Pacific Surfliner Passenger Railroad Corridor and services representing our region of California. The Paso Robles Housing Authority met on the 8th and received its status on 2 projects that is planning on building and managing in the near future. Now, we've dealt with both of them on the consent agenda, and the 78-unit senior citizen project is in the Woodland Plaza, while the other is in the Olson South Chandler specific plan area. The Library Board of Trustees met on the 10th and had another month of excellent participation and volume of use with a very small staff. Our library has been designated as a polling place for the November elections, both through inside ballot boxes as well as through the book drop. Employees are being deputized and trained in proper procedures. Thanks to our many volunteers, the staff can handle the extra workload. This department appears to give us more bang for our buck than any other, except perhaps the city council itself. They, like many of our citizens, have become very concerned with the approach the city is taking regarding possible revenue shortfalls. In that regard, we've also received letters from many associated with the library and library board, as well as a letter to the mayor from the California State Librarian, Greg Lucas. I hope we've all received those and read them. On the 11th, I took part in the September meeting of the Transportation Committee of the National League of Cities. In that meeting, we discussed strategies continuing the federal transportation grants and funding programs before Congress adjourns for the year. Since then, I've learned from Washington, D.C. that it's likely to be brought up later this week to keep the federal government from shutting down. Yesterday, the Main Street Board of Directors met outside near the gazebo for only the second board meeting they've had since the pandemic began because of restrictions on indoor gatherings. It was routine business with a new social media person handling some of their communications to continue promoting downtown businesses. Almost every public event for the rest of this year has been canceled. Its board is struggling to figure out how to do stationary parades or virtual tree lighting and seasonal kickoff celebrations. Halloween is definitely canceled this year due to the restrictions. Our budget cuts took up a lot of discussion time, as did the threat of losing a significant number of our businesses, including some anchor ones. If this happens, some think this will set up back 20 to 30 years in the vibrancy of our downtown, and they are very depressed. So next week, I'll be representing our region of California at the Board of Directors meeting of LoSan, the Pacific Surfliners agency regarding our train service, both north and south. And so I trust we'll respond to my request for a town hall meeting before this meeting ends. Please.
Councilwoman Garcia.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor. I attended your diversity panel meeting. I got to see who was on the panel, got to hear their great ideas. I think this is going to go forward. It's pretty excited to hear everybody's ideas, and they're going to put some subcommittee groups together. I hope that everybody that's interested in participating will reach out and join one of the subcommittees. I have also been meeting with residents on my lunch breaks and taking phone calls in the evenings, just to, everybody was worried about our budget and our meeting tonight. And that's all I have, sir.
Thank you. For my calendar, I attended a Channel County's webinar on state legislative actions that the Channel County's organization was looking for support and sign-ons for, so that was basically a legislative review of what was happening in Sacramento. Numerous conferences with our elected COVID reports, Penny Bernstein, County Public Health Officer, and other electeds meet regularly by telephone to get the latest update on the COVID situation. We heard a report earlier tonight from Mr. Stornetta on that. Good news is we've slipped out of the purple column. The bad news is it's easy to slip right back on. So we need to redouble our efforts to make sure that we can keep moving in a direction that keeps our businesses open. I attended, by way of video, the administration of oath to Officer McNutt. Met several times with our Small Business Grant Selection Committee. We reported earlier this evening distributing $200,000 in CARES Act money to local businesses to help them through the pandemic. I attended the Homeless Services Oversight Committee Encampment Committee meeting. I met with department heads in anticipation of tonight's discussions. I also met with the Channel County's Board of Directors regarding the upcoming conference at the end of the year for the League of California Cities. Did an interview with KSBY-TV regarding the recreation and library service issue. I met with John Pashong and Steve Gregory was there. We meet once a month. The issue of property tax did come up, but it's something that we're going to have to push much harder. I have to be honest with everyone, that's going to be quite an uphill battle and a challenge. Just as if someone came to our city and said, you need to give us some of your sales tax, we could find 1,000 reasons not to do that. It's going to take some real action to get that structurally changed with the county. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try, and we will try, but it's not something that can happen just at the flick of a switch. I met with the promotions committee of the Paso Robles Main Street organization to brainstorm with them ways to transition from the physical activities that they participate in as part of the holiday over the Christmas time, looking for ways to change the Christmas parade, change the tree lighting and other activities so that they can be done either virtually or at a distance, so we can still maintain a festive attitude in our downtown area as that season rolls around. They're working hard on that. I attended the RISE fundraiser in Atascadero, met with the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee with their regular meeting, and also today attended the Travel Paso Board of Directors meeting. I mentioned earlier that a new letter has been drafted to the governor. I'm going to get copies of that to the council tomorrow, and hopefully all of us and many other electeds and community members for that matter can sign on in support of that. Basically, it's again employing the governor to allow us some flexibility and allowing businesses to open inside the buildings as well as outside the buildings, of course, observing all safety requirements. And that is the sum total of my activities for the last 2 weeks on behalf of the city of Paso Robles. Mr. Frucci, do you have anything else for us?
Mr. Mayor,
I'm not forgetting. I want to come back to Fred's request about a public meeting in the city park. Did you want to comment on that?
Thank you, Your Honor. Yes, I would ask the city attorney to address that, please.
Well, I think an open meeting in the public park presents some difficulties to comply with the social distancing guidelines that still apply. San Luis Obispo County is still in the purple category, which is the most restricted so far. So with the public meeting, obviously, we want to make sure we can accommodate anyone who can attend, and that's difficult when we have to limit the number of people who can attend and ensure that people are social distancing and wearing their masks outside. So I think I understand the concern, and, I think everybody's moving hopefully in the right direction where we're going to be able to reopen soon. But I wouldn't want to jeopardize, the current COVID funding that you have been spending. And tonight you heard some of the great programs that it's being used for. But we want to make sure we don't step on the health programs that could jeopardize that funding going forward.
So Kimberly, is the way we could do this virtually? Can we do Zoom or team meetings with private citizens answer their questions? Is there some alternative to actually physically getting together that we could employ?
Well, you can do the meetings like you're doing now, where you can call in a live meeting to the extent, there are needs for people to come to City Hall for individual meetings. Those we've still been able to accommodate. They can call and make an appointment. So, I'm hoping we will be able to reopen soon. And I believe they've been working in the council chambers to be able to accommodate greater social distancing once we start to move out of the purple stage.
So I just want to make sure I understand. If we're going to play by the rules, there is a physical crowd size that you can't exceed, even with social distancing. Is that correct?
Correct. I believe. Well, I'd have to double check, but I believe there is a limit on the number
Outdoors?
of people. Just like yes, even restaurants have limited capacity. I mean, they have to make sure they're spaced out further. So and technologically, honestly, that was the question we'd have to look into. I can say we can look into it and start preparing more, as I know city staff has been working on that in hopes of being able to reopen soon. But I would exercise caution in doing that so far. I don't believe any of the other cities in Sloan County have done that yet. For the same reason. So when you accept the COVID money, we got to, as you said, play by the rules.
So let's do this, because I don't want to let Fred's suggestion to fall through the cracks entirely. Let me get a hold of Dr. Bornstein tomorrow and get a definitive on that, and whether there are any exceptions for public, for city meetings or something like that. And then we're going to have a conversation with our IT person about what requirements we would have to fulfill legally to have a public meeting outdoors.
Kimberly, I have a question on legality for promotion on that.
Okay.
So how do we have that meeting without promoting it?
You mean promoting?
Measure J.
Oh, yeah. So so you could not have. For Measure J, you can't have city resources that are involved in a promotion of it. You can have an informational meeting, but you can't have
information only
involved in. Yeah, it has to be information only.
So question and answer qualifies.
So
yes.
Let me ask.
On the other hand, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, we're talking over each other.
Sorry, I was going to say that the technology, having the virtual does allow those that would have concerns about attending a meeting in person the ability to participate as well. So I think, in some instances, the other side of the coin is that you get more participation with the virtual meetings from those who maybe could not attend an in-person meeting.
So I don't want to get into the details of this because it's far afield of the agenda, but I think that it's worth sending to staff for potential options for community information presentations. We've done that for the subdivisions, things like that, where people come of their own volition, they see presentations, they get information, and we could actually do that indoors, say at Centennial Park, but only allow a certain number of people in at a time.
Now, Mr. Mayor, I'm also thinking maybe we would have two, one that is in person and the other that is virtual.
Okay.
Just so that people can get the information, that's all, get their questions answered.
Okay, so I think we got a lot of questions to be answered here. I'm not opposed to it, Fred, but let's see if we can talk with staff and get some real answers, okay? Okay. Anything else, Mr. Frucci?
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Hammond, yes.
Yeah, I'd like to just say a word about our friend and colleague, Ed Steinbeck passing. Yeah. He was definitely a cornerstone in our city for many, many years, and council member with us. And, I was really blessed to, be able to sit next to him and learn a lot from him and work with him in those years. I think he came off council about 6 years ago. And I remember, again, it was like whatever he put his hands on, he did a great job. I mean, it was like he worked hard and had the better, city view, and always in his mind for everybody that lived here. And again, I'd like to, basically say we're going to be sending a little sympathy note to Linda, his wife. He moved back east probably about 3 or 4 years ago to be closer with his family. He did pass from Parkinson. And again, I just learned of this last week that he did pass. So again, I think we talked about adjourning our city council meeting tonight in Ed's memory, and wish everybody that knew him that they may get in touch with the family too, to give him a word.
Simply echo those comments, John. When I came back on the council, he was seated, and I quickly became friends with him and enjoyed working with him immensely. When he left the council, I visited him for his opinions and perspectives on the problems that we faced back then. A great guy, a hard worker for the city, and a shame to see him go. Other comments, Mr. Gregory?
Yeah, I really appreciate Ed as well, both professionally out in the real estate world and on the council and on the planning commission. He's a great man, and his heart was in Paso. Very nice man.
Mr. Strong?
Yes, and I sat on the council with him, and he was a wonderful member of this council, and he was always so positive and always very helpful. He was a great Roblin, and it's so sad to see a member of that family go. That whole family has been wonderful members of this whole region, this whole part of California, and it's all sad. We all have to go sooner or later, but it's still sad, and our memories of him will always be fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Maria, I don't know if you knew Ed. Had you met Ed?
No, sir, I did not, but my sympathies do go out to his family.
Very good. Okay, I'm going to announce our upcoming events as soon as I ask Mr. Frucci. Anything else in store for us tonight?
No, sir.
Okay, I'll announce our upcoming events, and then I'll entertain a motion to close in Ed's honor. Coming up next, Airport Commission meeting Thursday, September 24th, 6:30 p.m. Planning Commission Tuesday, September 22nd, 6:30 p.m. Our next City Council regular meeting is Tuesday, October the 6th, 6:30 p.m. The deadline for submitting items for the regular meeting on Tuesday, October the 6th is Wednesday, September the 23rd. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn in the honor and memory of our departed council compatriot, and wish him Godspeed. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.